Hello, and welcome back to Zenin Fanfics. Today we're starting an exciting new series. What if female Deku was in Highschool DXD? If you enjoy this video, please like and subscribe for more content. The story we're featuring is written by Anthony Tyler 9 on Wattpad. You can find all the relevant links in the description, so be sure to check out the author's profile and say hello. Now let's dive into the story. Izuku was running around the beach as soon as she had cleared up all the trash. She had been training for the last 10 months before the UA entrance exams. Ever since All Might had informed her that her reward would be given to her if she made it into the school through the entrance exams, she was pumped. What she never expected to happen was that when she was running through the streets making her way over to UA was for her to meet up with a peculiar person who was glaring harshly at her with malicious intent. You mustn't be allowed to become a hero. You will destroy MSTR all for one's plans, for that you will be taken from this timeline indefinitely. The person said, as Izuku couldn't slow herself down in time before she felt the ground in front of herself be pulled out from under herself as she fell into a seemingly endless pit. Hiya! Izuku screamed as the portal or something closed at the top. Izuku didn't know for how long she had been falling through the portal, but it got to the point of which she couldn't scream anymore since it got boring. She was in a continuous state of freefall, and as she moved about the area, she was completely unaware of the ground that was coming up really fast. As soon as she did take notice of it, though, she placed her arms in front of her vital organs, her stomach and head, as she landed on the ground with a massive smoke cloud. She had soon passed out from the pain of breaking her limbs, almost to the point of which they couldn't be used. If she wasn't healed, she would die of her injuries since she had landed on a massive rock, which broke all of her limbs and caused cuts as she tumbled across the mountain she was falling down. By the time she had stopped rolling down the mountain, she had been stopped by a tree trunk that was black in color. And as she looked around in a panic, she never noticed how something was appearing near her. But because of BLD loss, as well as her injuries, she passed out, completely and blissfully unaware that someone with crimson red hair and regal clothes was walking nearby. Sirzechs Lucifer was the main leader of the Underworld's devil population, and with that title of Lucifer came a lot of paperwork that never allowed him to leave his office. It was times where he could take a break like now that he loved to walk near the familiar forest as he looked at the forest. It was a quiet day in the Underworld as Sirzechs let out a huff of cool air. The winter months within the Underworld had always been horrible for those who couldn't stand the cold depths of hell. He heard movement from nearby as he turned his head to look over. He soon found a familiar seemingly licking up something nearby and went to investigate. What he saw nearly caused him to vomit from how bad the thing he looked at was looking. He walked over as close as he could to the person as he found it was a young girl, around high school age, as she was breathing heavily. Placing his fingers on her jugular vein, he soon found that she had a pulse, but the alarming thing was that it was extremely light. She would die soon if he didn't help her. He wouldn't be able to make it to the Sirzechs hospital in the Underworld since they were too far away from him. So he decided to use some magic that only he was privy to since he was one of the full leaders of the Underworld. Making a magic circle underneath the girl, he started to transform her body into that of a devil, her body slowly but surely clicking its bones back into place. It was horrifying at how the young girl had been completely asleep as he did this, but from what he saw, her mind and body couldn't keep her awake due to the pain and shock had caused her to pass out. By the time the magic spell was complete, Sirzechs had stopped his spell and watched as the girl's body had become much more desirable. Her body proportions were increased slightly more than what they were previously. Her chest was what increased the most. From what he could tell from his first glance at the girl, she had been at least a C-cup in terms of BRSD size. Now, she was nearly as big as his little sister's BRSD size. Not that he kept an eye on that. She was his little sister. He knew this information when he decided to buy his little sister a new BR, since her melons were constantly growing bigger than the last year. So to see that this young lady had grown from a mere C-cup to around a G-cup, or possibly slightly bigger than that, surprised him. The rest of her body had changed slightly as her hips had become slightly bigger than they originally were, but the most concerning change was her hair color. Before they were a dark green in color, Now they were mostly dark green with a bit of crimson coloring that speckled through. Nodding to himself, he picked the unconscious girl up from the ground as he held her in a princess carry and teleported away. Waking up on a bed, Izuku was completely confused and concerned about where she had ended up. And she was certainly hoping that she wasn't in the presence of a very lecherous old man or young man who wanted to defile her. But there was one thing that Izuku had noticed about herself that she knew wasn't like that before she appeared. Where she did her melons were definitely much larger than she remembered them to be. Standing up from a bed she was laying on, she moved over to a mirror in order to see what had happened, only to find her hair looking like a mixture of dark green and crimson red. She had thought her head was bleeding when she saw the BLD red coloring in her hair and ran into the nearby room that thankfully had a shower and began to try and clear the crimson coloring out of her hair, believing it to be BLD. As soon as she had finished what she believed was clearing her head of the crimson color, she looked at the bathroom mirror only to see herself with slightly crimson hair mixed with her natural dark green. Looking into her own eyes, though, she noticed that they were shining emeralds with a slight teal tone to them. As she looked at her body proportions, she noticed that they looked more prepared for something that she didn't want at the moment, nor what she would want to think about. As soon as she left the bathroom, she found some clothes sitting on the bed for her as she looked around the place, as she looked to find if someone was watching her from afar. Once she was happy that nobody was watching her, she started to put on the new clothes on her body, and once she got to the BR, she looked at the paper on the nearby table. Walking over to it, after placing a shirt over herself, she looked at what it stated. Make a wish and it will come true. Looking at the pamphlet, she had shook her head and placed a wish inside the pamphlet as it started to glow an ominous blue color. Once the glow ended, a silver-haired woman had appeared in a maid's outfit as she looked around the room before smiling at Izuku. Hello, MDM. How can I help you today? The woman asked, as Izuku stared at her proportions as well. Is everyone here in whatever this place is really well endowed? Izuku muttered unknowingly a little too loud and got a slight chuckle from the woman. My name is Gremory Household. My husband Sirzechs Lucifer had found you near death on the outskirts of the familiar forest. He used a magical spell that transformed your injured and near-death body into that of a pure-blooded devil. Although it seems as though your body had taken to the pure BLD and placed them in the right spots. Gremory said, as Izuku blushed slightly. Could I get a sports BR? I don't really like the normal BRs that most girls like. Izuku asked, as Gremory nodded as a small magic circle appeared in her hand. Once the BR was given to Izuku, she had taken off her shirt in front of Gremory as she placed the sports BR on like a pro, and as soon as she made sure that her melons weren't being squeezed too hard by the fabric, she allowed herself to relax. Is there anything else you need, young lady? Although I would like to know the name of my new little sister. Gremory said, as Izuku remembered the place she was in. Where am I? What is a devil? How did I get here? Wait, you already told me that. Am I still in Isizuku, Japan? Izuku asked, and answered one of her questions in quick succession. Gremory had blinked at the quick, fast-paced question before she shook her head and answered each one that she heard. We'll start. You're not in Isizuku, Japan. That place doesn't exist here in the Underworld. And to answer some of your other questions, a devil is a species that is capable of wielding magic and can use it to both defend themselves and attack others. We are creatures who bear the 7 deadly sins within our own BLD. You're currently inside the Gremory estate, where the Gremory family are allowing you sanctum. Now for how you got here, we have no idea as to how you arrived in the Underworld. From what we know, you had randomly appeared, and no human before you have ever appeared in the Underworld without devil presence being with them. Gremory said, as Izuku stared at the woman before sitting on the bed. My name is Midoriya Izuku. Family name Midoriya. Given name Izuku. I was on my way to UA High School when a villain appeared in front of me, and I don't exactly remember what happened after that. All I know was that I couldn't stop myself as I was still running towards the villain. And as soon as the ground beneath me had disappeared, I fell down into a portal. Izuku asked, as she muttered about the quirks of those who could create portals to other dimensions. Grafia watched the girl mutter to her heart's content as the older woman smiled at the younger's antics before patting the girl on the head. As much as I would love to hear you mutter to yourself, I think you should meet the rest of the Gremory family. They have something to offer you, so that you can join our society as one of us. Grafia said, as Izuku exited her muttering with a blush on her face. Sorry, I get really worked up when I talk about quirks. The girl said, as Grafia nodded. The two walked down the seemingly endless hallways of the Gremory mansion as they searched for the kitchen of the building, and once they arrived in the dining room, they soon found the people they were supposed to meet. The man of the group had been tall, just slightly shorter than the man who had long crimson hair and was radiating an aura that told Izuku to not mess with them. The man who was slightly shorter than the other was calmer, collected, and he had shorter red hair with a goatee that made him look wiser than one would think. The woman next to the man, though, was a very voluptuous woman, her melons being the standout thing about her, as they were seemingly the impossible F-cup melons that Izuku had heard that Ryukyu could achieve when only in her draconic form. Shaking her head at the thought of a bigger BRSD size, Izuku heard the woman talking to the man next to her. So that is the young lady who Sirzechs saved from death. Can you sense her power, Zeoticus? The woman asked. Yes, her power is akin to Sirzechs' own when he was in the Devil Civil War. She appears to be a prodigy within our race, even if she was forced to become on for her own survival. Zeoticus said, as he walked over to Izuku. The young girl had blushed at how the man got so close to her when he bowed to her. I apologize for talking about you when you were right here. My name is Zeoticus Gremory. The woman you were listening to was my wife, Venelana Gremory. Zeoticus said, as Izuku started to sputter about how the man shouldn't bow to her. What did you both talk about when you said that I was a prodigy within your race? Izuku asked, seemingly pulling out a notebook from seemingly nowhere. Everyone in the area noticed how she had done that, and were surprised with how the girl could do that without anyone taking notice. What we were talking about is the magical spell that Sirzechs had used to bring you back from near death and transform your body to that of a pure BLD devil. It made sure that you could take some magic from him as well as our bloodline magical ability. You have the ability to control our family's magical prowess, our symbol of the family, our power of destruction. Zeoticus said as Izuku started to write this down. She had written down everything from what she could remember of the man talking to her. She had even asked questions of her own during his explanation, as they ended up going on a history lesson about the devils, angels, fallen angels, as well as the Great War that happened between all the factions within the Christian pantheon. Once Izuku's mind was sated with the information, she looked at her hands and thought about what Zeoticus had informed her about his family's magic that was called the power of destruction. She looked at those around herself, as she could only think about one question that was on her mind that she needed to be answered. Why you mean that I'm not quirkless anymore? Izuku asked, tears brimming to the surface. As Izuku stared at the crowd that had surrounded her at the breakfast table, she looked at each person with a scared and somewhat saddened expression on her face. Young lady, what do you mean by quirkless? Zeoticus asked, as he stared at the young girl in front of himself. I come from a W world where everyone, at least almost everyone, had a S superpower. We called them meta abilities when they first appeared, but over time they were changed to Q quirks. I wasn't born with one, and was relentlessly bullied and abused for it. Izuku said, as everyone gained dark expressions on their faces. What do you mean that you were abused for your quirklessness? Sirzechs questioned as he knelt in front of Izuku. The sheer height difference of the two caused the girl to shrink in on herself before she spoke up about her past. About how, as a child, when she was diagnosed as without a quirk, everyone around her, except for her mother, had given up on her abilities as a person. She was treated as a damsel in distress. Her best friend Kakin had been incredibly rude to her during her childhood until she had reached middle school, where everything had just gotten worse over time. He had continuously beat her down for declaring that she would become a hero from the age of 4 until today, and the last word she had heard from him was from the last day of middle school about him telling her to essentially kill herself to gain a quirk and possibly become a hero that way. Sirzechs had never before wanted to kill a brat and extinguish that life more than he ever had before since the Great Devil Civil War. And that was a hard thing to do. So to hear that Izuku had nobody in her corner to help her become strong, except for her mother who still loved her dearly, just didn't support her dream, caused Sirzechs to feel something to resonate with Izuku. Grafia, how much time would it take to make Izuku as strong as you within the next few months? Sirzechs questioned his queen. If you're wanting to make her as strong as me in terms of raw power, it would take years for her to do it. You would need a space where she could train for many years, and outside it would either be a few hours or a full day. Grafia said, as Sirzechs thought about it. Find me a spell where you could train her for about a month in order to become at least as strong as Rias. If she is as strong as Rias, then she could train herself and become stronger using the facilities we have in our family. Sirzechs informed as Grafia left immediately. Izuku stared at him in shock. She had never had someone help her this much before All Might came along, so to hear that this man, this leader of an entire race of beings, dedicates his time to help her caused tears to flow from her eyes. "What's wrong, dear?" Venelana asked, as she pulled Izuku by her shoulders over to her. "I don't know what to say. And nobody's ever wanted to help me before, not before my idol helped me," Izuku said, as Zeoticus perked up at idol. "Who is this idol you speak of?" he questioned as Izuku looked at him. "He was the world's greatest hero, at least in the world I came from. As since Mizudafu isn't a part of this world's Japan. His hero name was All Might. He was my idol ever since I watched a video of him saving a mass of people from a burning building. My favorite phrase from him was this: 'Never fear. Hope is near, for I am here,'" Izuku said, as she happily got into character, even morphing her face to look similar to the man she idolized. Everyone looked at her for a moment before chuckling at her impersonation of the man who she idolized. "Didn't think you would try and impersonate your idol. How did you get your face to look like that?" Venelana asked as she laughed. Izuku's face had never been so red from Sirzechs' view, and he wanted to make sure the girl could have more moments like this. As soon as Grafia had returned with a magic spell that could create a room where Izuku could train for a month to catch up to Rias, who apparently was Sirzechs' little sister, was at raw power-wise. So as Grafia had brought Izuku into the small dimension of magic, Izuku stared at the vast expanse of the magic spell as the woman stared Izuku down. "Now from what I know, your magical power seems to be sealed in a way. I will push a pulse of my magic through you, and it will be up to you to see if you can sense it and bring it out," Grafia said as Izuku nodded. Once Grafia had placed her palm on the girl's chest, Izuku blushed from the touch, as it was both warming and cold at the touch. But soon after she felt a force being pushed throughout her whole body, and as she tried to feel out the force of magic coursing through her out of her body in a sort of outlet, she never expected to have an explosion of magic come from her body and crater the ground. They were outside, by the way. Once the ground cratered from the amount of magical power coming from the young girl, her devil wings had sprouted out from behind herself, her long curly green and crimson hair flowing in the magical aura that moved about her entire body. Grafia was actually surprised when she felt the power of Izuku, not to mention the amount of devil wings the girl possessed. In terms of pure power, you seem to already be far ahead of Rias. This will do nicely. I will be training you in order to control the power of destruction which you hold within your body. You will also learn how to wield the powers that I teach you during this month of training. Is that understood?" Grafia asked as Izuku nodded. With that said, Grafia had set off to train Izuku with her pod in order to allow the girl to MSTR the power of the Gremory family. Whilst that was happening, Sirzechs was calling his little sister up in order to inform her about the fact that he might have just accidentally adopted a new sister for her to dote on. When Rias had heard of that information, she had teleported into the Underworld to see the young girl herself, so she could dote on her herself. Rias Gremory was a very appealing young woman, as she held G-cup melons and a very voluptuous form. The most standout feature besides her massive chest was her hair color and how it extended over to her lower back. As soon as Rias had arrived at her home, she soon found her parents looking at a massive spell that was drawn on the ground and only had about a few hours left before it would end. "Where is this little sister brother informed me about?" Rias questioned her parents as they smirked at her. Turning over to the magic circle on the ground, Rias watched as over the next few hours nothing happened. That was until it started to shine from the ground as Grafia had exited the magic circle with a smug look on her face. But there was something off about that smile, as a smaller girl had moved out from behind the older woman, catching Rias' attention. She was short, undeniably short, at least half of Grafia's height, as she only stood at least to the woman's upper torso. The new girl had long, dark green hair that had some crimson coloring speckled throughout it. Her chest was nearly as big as her own, and she had emerald eyes that had some teal inside. But if there was anything that she looked closely at was the freckles that were sorted on the cheeks of her face to form a diamond. As soon as the girl noticed that someone new was there, she immediately screeched softly before hiding behind Grafia. "Oh, my Satan, you are so adorable," Rias said, running over to Izuku and pulling the shorter girl into a hug. The younger girl, for her part, was blushing from having her face pushed into the older girl's generous bust as she struggled to get out of the impromptu hug. "Lady Rias, it would be prudent to get away from my student," Grafia said, as Rias immediately let go of Izuku. "What are you talking about? Isn't she the little sister that Zex was talking about?" Rias questioned as Grafia smiled. "Yes, and this is Izuku Midoriya. She had been transformed into a devil to save her from an injury that would have resulted in complete death. So your older brother sacrificed half of his overall power in order to save her life. The unintended effect it had was bonding both his BLD and power to her. Show her your wings, my lady," Grafia said, as Izuku showed everyone her wings. When Grafia had first seen them in the training room of the magic spell, they were only 6 in number, but now that they were shown to everyone it seemed as if she gained another pair. "E8 wings. How is this possible?" Rias questioned as Grafia looked at her. It seems that in order to save the girl, Sirzechs gave her a small portion of his power to increase her body's durability to the area where she could fight the high-tier, high-class devils of our society without much issue. Grafia informed, "This is so cool. Where does she go for school?" "She looks to be around at least my pawn's age in terms of looks," Rias questioned, looking Izuku in the eye. "Well, she should be in her first year of high school. But for her education, we haven't decided where she would be attending for that," Grafia said, as Rias nodded. "I will see if we can get her into Kuoh Academy as a transfer student. That way she can make some friends with both mine Sona's peerages," Rias said, as Grafia nodded along. "I will see to it that Sirzechs knows that you all are going to the same school. But for Izuku, we need to make sure that she doesn't show her powers to the humans, except those who are in both your and Sona's peerages," Grafia said, as Izuku followed both women. "Is there a reason why we can't show our powers to those of humans?" Izuku questioned as she looked confused. Humans of this world were not born with powers. They can learn them as soon as hearing the supernatural world exists. But that doesn't mean that they can fight us on their own without powers of their own. So you will need to learn how to control your power, as well as make sure that you can appear as human in front of others," Grafia said, as Rias nodded along. The trio had soon arrived in Sirzechs' office within the Gremory estate as they talked about plans of moving Izuku to the human world with Rias and her peerage so that she could still go to school. As that was happening, Izuku was thinking about a new way to use her magical power. It was a way that would be much easier to use, as well as much more versatile. Whilst everyone in the office were talking to one another about her future as a student of Kuoh Academy, Izuku started playing with her magic of power of destruction. She created small orbs of the powerful ball of destruction, and she moved them around herself in order to create different ways of using them. Unknown to her, she was audibly muttering about other ways she could use the power to her advantage in fights, as well as use them to surprise other opponents in the field of battle. Not to mention the heroic aspects of such a destructive power in order to clear debris from fallen allies and help them out. Whilst this was happening, she never noticed or felt how 3 faces were staring at her in both alarm as well as mirth as she muttered to herself. Does she do this a lot? Rias asked as Grafia thought about it. She had heard the girl mutter to herself from time to time, whenever they trained, but thought nothing of it until now. They all then watched as the girl somehow pulled a notebook into existence with a pen in order to write everything down. Where is she holding that notebook? Rias questioned once more as Sirzechs stared on in disbelief. Grafia was now looking even more happy that the Gremory family had finally found a young descendant of their family who actually used their power of destruction in a strategic way other than Sirzechs. Soon, when Izuku finished muttering to herself, the others watched as she looked up at them with a slowly building blush on her whole body before passing out from the embarrassment. Well, I never thought someone could pass out from embarrassment, but this is a first, Sirzechs said as the group chuckled. Izuku would wake up a few minutes later, looking very adorable as she blushed in embarrassment. Rias had taken this moment of weakness to further tease the girl about her muttering problem as Izuku started to sputter nonsense. Once the teasing was over, though, they had changed everything to about the school she would be attending with Rias. Izuku had formally introduced herself, as Rias had done the same as they talked about how devils act within the underworld as well as the human world. Grafia took this time in order to create a small training plan for Izuku to follow so that she wouldn't lose power as well as slowly increase her maximum power over time. When Izuku looked over the training plan, she smiled at it since it looked eerily similar to another plan she followed back in her old dimension. But now that she thought about it, she wished she could call her mother and tell her that she was all right and safe. Although now that she was walking with Rias, they stopped in the girls' room as they opened a magic circle and disappeared from the underworld. Izuku holding the training plan in her notebook as they disappeared from the Gremory estate and into a weird dark room with occult items strewn about. Once Izuku looked about the room, she found a small girl with white hair and a black cat hair pin in her hair looking at her. Another girl was standing near Rias as the woman had sat down in her seat within the room. She had long black hair and a ponytail that extended to near her rear in length. Next to Izuku, though, was a young man with blonde hair as well as bluish-gray eyes, and he was wearing a uniform that seemed to be for men. And the last one she saw was a young man with brown hair as well as chocolate amber eyes as he stared at her with a blush on his face. "You are really appealing," he uttered underneath his breath, causing Izuku to blush. The girl hadn't changed from her sports BR and short shorts for her training, and the young man's nose began to bleed from getting a very good view of her body. As soon as Izuku noticed where his eyes were looking, as in looking all over her frame, she immediately eeped and ran into the other room, a full-body blush covering herself as Rias gave her a new uniform so that she could attend the school. I hope you enjoy your time here, because whilst you are training yourself in the backyard of the Occult Research Club, you will be sending out pamphlets in order to do contracts. You will follow me when we do mine, so that you can get a feel for them. Also, just know that when you do a contract that you don't have to do what the customer wants you to do. You cannot go further than what you are wishing for a contract that even extends to SXL actions. Rias said as Izuku nodded. It was here that a new arrival came through the doors, as this one was a girl as well. She was shorter than the boy who was currently shaking his head at the moment. She had long blonde hair as well as green eyes that made her look extremely innocent to Izuku, and Izuku knew from that moment onward she would get along with that girl specifically. Smiling to herself, Izuku changed her clothes. She was definitely going to like this world, especially since Kaken wasn't here to bully her anymore. It hasn't been very long since Izuku was brought into Kuoh Academy, and she has been very happy towards the reception toward herself. She was able to be herself as she wrote down things about her observations about other people, and they were actually capable of becoming friendly with her. She even helped some of them with their homework throughout the day, whenever their class gave some homework for them to complete. The young girl was slowly becoming more and more outgoing as she learned how to show her true self. It soon became apparent that the young girl had a heroic personality as she wanted to help any and all people with their issues. She showed compassion towards those who probably shouldn't be shown it, mainly Issei as well as his perverted friends. Sure, she knew that she should stay away from the friends of Issei's, but she just couldn't help but find the trio hilarious sometimes, whenever they would beat down on Issei, whenever he would be seen helping her around the place. Some of the girls thought that she and Issei were getting together, but Izuku slammed those rumors down completely without remorse as she stated that Issei was attractive but ultimately not who she wanted to stay with. But that didn't stop her from wishing to be close to him as a friend, and they both would be seen sparring together whenever lunch came around or after school for her first week of it. Issei had then taken it upon himself to bring Izuku around Kuoh so that she could find out what the town was like since there wasn't much fanfare around it. From what she heard from the young man, he had been killed by a fallen angel named Rainier, but for some reason he had told her that he didn't want to trust some of the girls in his school. Because of what had happened to him, he had chosen to ignore his own death on a date with a very attractive girl, and it would prove to be very challenging to bring him out of his shell of slight fear. Izuku had noticed how, whenever she would bring up Kuoh Park, that the young man gained a slight pained expression whenever it was brought up. So she kept them away from it in order to keep him from feeling whatever it was he felt whenever they passed the park. He had shown him around the entirety of Kuoh by the time it was dusk outside, and that Rias peerage had to kill a stray devil. Unknown to Izuku, Kiba had been shown a picture of Issei and his old childhood friend when they were little with a holy sword behind both children, as Kiba wouldn't be feeling alright soon. But in order to learn how to take down stray devils, Izuku decided to head out with Rias and Koh in order to learn how to help out however she could. She may not be a true devil, but she wouldn't let them take care of it themselves. They could get hurt if she wasn't there. Arriving at the broken-down warehouse, they all waited outside as Kiba, Issei, and Kaneko had entered the warehouse as Rias explained to Izuku their job. You see, as a peerage you're to work together as if it is a chess game in order to take down your enemy. Sometimes others just do it with raw power, but I prefer to allow my pieces to have their own turns to attack. Kiba, my knight, has increased speed as well as precision. Kaneko is my rook. She has increased strength, defense, as well as durability. Now as for Issei, he is my only pawn piece. He has the uncanny ability to use every single power that each of the pieces of chess have except for the king piece. He has the power of promotion, where he can use the power of a rook, knight, or queen piece in order to overpower an opponent. I'm currently training him to become my ultimate pawn. Rias said, as Izuku noticed something wrong about the situation. Are they supposed to take so long to kick the stray devil out of its home? Izuku questioned as Rias looked at the warehouse. But soon enough, the stray devil had been blasted out of the building through the front door as Issei held Kaneko's arm over his shoulder as he helped her out of the building. Rias had run over as Akino. Rias' queen piece had blasted the stray to smithereens. Izuku was worried over Issei and Kaneko as Asia had run over to heal both of them. But there was something Izuku noticed from a mere glance. Kiba was not paying attention to anything. It was as if he was distracted. But then a slap was overheard in everything, and Izuku finally noticed how Rias had slapped Kiba for his insolence. Why are you distracted, Kiba? You could have gotten Kaneko or ISC killed. What is going on? Rias demanded, as Kiba looked away from Rias. Just some things had returned, and I need to step away from my job as a devil for a short while. I don't think I can return back to the peerage for a while, Kiba said, as he walked away from the group. Issei had then run over to ask what the hell is going on with him, as the young man informed him of what was happening. Izuku couldn't hear what they were talking about, but she knew that it was important. The remaining members of Rias peerage had returned with Izuku in tow to their club room, as Izuku sat on the couch thinking about why the boy acted like that. Over the next week and a half, Izuku would take notice that some of the girls were saddened by the disappearance of Kiba and would overhear Issei talking to Saji about meeting him at a cafe. Thinking nothing of it, and that they were just going to find Kiba, Izuku went back over to see if she could train some with the kendo girls. Once she entered the gym where the other girls were training, Izuku saw the wooden swords that were hanging on the wall nearby. But there was something that was seemingly drawing her presence over to it. And once she was in front of the piece that was demanding her presence, she found that it was a sword imbued with magical power. That's the aim, no Murakumo, no Tsurugi. A a sword based off of the gods of the Shinto faction. It was created from the magical power of the Yamato no Orochi. His power was so great that even the moon god Tsukuyami had sealed the Oni into the blade to act as a power source for it. Murayama said, as Izuku stared at the weapon. "Why is it in here?" Izuku asked as Murayama smiled. "It's because it's a supernatural weapon. A weapon that is only capable of allowing devils to wield its power, and I hope that you can wield it. None of the girls here are part of the supernatural in terms of magical power, and it needs someone strong enough to wield it." Murayama said, as she looked at Izuku. "I will try and hold it later. I feel a presence from it. I don't know what it is, but I will give it a shot later." Izuku said, as Murayama and Kate smiled at her. The trio had then left to train with sword for the rest of the day, and as they were training Issei and his allies were searching for Kiba and helping the exorcists who had arrived earlier on that day, before Rias had met Izuku. And whilst that was happening, the end of the day was nearing as Izuku now stood in front of the aim no Murakumo no Tsurugi. She felt the magical presence it was holding just from standing a few feet away from it. She smiled at it as she let out her pure energy. Just the small power she was showing to the girls in the room made them all believe that Izuku was going to be capable of using the sword. But as soon as Izuku's innocent energy clashed with the corrupted power of the aim no Murakumo no Tsurugi, they watched as both powers clashed in the air. Izuku's expression was the same as the powerful blade's own aura was glaring at her harshly as it tried to overpower her own magical presence with its own. This continued for a few minutes as Izuku's face was starting to show some expressions of pain, but she continued on because she could feel the sadness within the Yamato no Orochi's heart. Placing her heads over her heart, Izuku let out her spirit and moved it towards the sword and entered it entirely. The other girls had seen this even and made sure to catch the girl as her body seemingly fell to the ground, and they caught it before it hit the ground. Placing a pillow underneath the girl's head, they wall-washed with bated breath as Izuku seemingly fought the being inside the blade. Izuku stood in front of a scene that was horrifying. She watched as Yamato no Orochi had stood before a small village that was devastated. "This place, it used to be the village I lived in when I was little," Orochi explained as Izuku stared at the man. He was a tall Oni as he looked extremely dangerous, but the look on his face was filled with regret, guilt, and sadness. "Why are you sad?" Izuku asked as the Oni looked at her. "I am forever sealed within this blade. Humans had killed my kind for millennia, and I was all that was left of them before they were all placed in the yokai faction's clutches. I'm glad that the remnants of my people are safe, but I would prefer that an Oni be leading them, not a yokai fox." Orochi said as he sat down next to Izuku. "I feel like there's a big problem you're having at the moment, sir," Izuku said as Orochi looked at her before chuckling. "Don't you have a problem of your own? You're not a goddess from the Shinto faction. You're seemingly a devil, but you do not belong in our world." Orochi said as he sniffed her hair. "You're right, I don't belong here. But that doesn't mean that I can't help those who need it, even if they say that they don't need it," Izuku said as Orochi laughed. "What makes you think that you can help me? What is in it for you if you help me with my issues?" Orochi asked as he laughed hard. "Well, if you must know, the world I come from, everyone had superpowers. It was a world that regretfully I was born without a superpower of my own. You've read comic books, right?" Izuku asked as Orochi smiled. "That I have. What is it about this world of superpowers that you weren't born with that is the issue with for you?" Orochi asked as Izuku explained her past growing up, how she was diagnosed as quirkless, as well as the friends that she had made before the age of 4 had betrayed her trust and started to beat her up for her quirklessness. How the boy she had once had a crush on told her to just end herself before being reborn with a quirk in her next life, and how she met her hero, who told her no at first to her question to become a hero without a quirk before rescinding the statement, saying that she was already a hero. She talked about how she had trained for 10 whole months cleaning a beach just to make sure that she could make it through the UA entrance exams. Just for some random man tell her that he will take her down for his MSTR all for one, and made a portal into this world, Just she landed in the Underworld and was forcefully transformed into a devil to save her life by Sirzechs. Orochi had listened softly as he placed a hand over her back and rubbed it. He felt as if it was talking to his old wife when he was younger before he gave into his rage at Tsukuyumi. This girl may have her aura of kindness and compassion, but she was not his reincarnated wife who had been killed by the merciless god. So he decided to be an alternate father for her, helping her through the events of her previous life, as she informed him. He then decided to tell her about his issues, about how he was originally a warrior who praised the moon god Tsukuyumi and had watched as a tribe of Oni were slaughtered by the very same moon god. It was that man who caused Orochi to gain a full hatred of the Shinto gods and would attempt to make any and all who wielded the power of his blade to kill them. The only god he had no qualms with was surprisingly Amaterasu. She was the sun goddess who had provided the warmth of the sun every day. If she were to be killed, everything would be just placed under chaos, and he would rather her stay alive within her very own pantheon. Once his tale of terror, hatred, fury, and guilt was over, Izuku had given him a side hug, as for some reason her pure innocence had transformed the area they were sitting at into a small park from her old world. Izuku was now a 4-year-old as Orochi was also the same age as the little girl as she stared at him as she pulled the younger Orochi into a hug, unaware that she was expelling all the hatred, fear, guilt, sorrow, and anything he wanted done with the Shinto gods. And for once he never felt like he had to look behind his back once more, but he noticed how Izuku's eyes had gained a lighter tint to them. Her emerald eyes were just slightly darker now, as they showed her expressive emerald-colored eyes. He smiled before turning himself into a small orb of power as he spoke within the girl's mind, as his orb was absorbed into Izuku's chest. "My power is now yours to use. Use it to defeat any who get in your way and make a family that you will be proud of in the future," Orochi said, as Izuku smiled at the small dagger that was in her hand. Once she had felt the power of Orochi within her body, she was expelled from the weapon as her soul entered her body once more. Looking around the room, she never noticed how her eyes had become slitted and looks like the other girls took in her emerald eyes mixed in with purple. "Looks like you're a supernatural creature. Which kind are you, though?" Murayama asked, as Izuku became completely concerned. "Shoot." After informing the girls of the Kendo Club about how she was a part of the supernatural world, they all informed her that they would love to be her first customers. For packs, that is. With that done and over with, Izuku was on her way back to the ORC in order to see if Rias and her peerage had returned from their mission. Arriving inside the room, she only found one person missing as she remembered what had happened the other day with Kiba. "Are you able to continue your work as a devil if Kiba-san isn't here?" Izuku asked, as everyone looked at her. "Yes, we will need to make sure that Kiba doesn't become a stray devil, though. Otherwise, we would have a very disturbing opponent on our end. Not to mention a very familiar problem," Rias said, as she continued like normal. Izuku wasn't too sure of what was happening, but she wouldn't put it past Rias to have something planned for this. As she was about to leave, a magic circle had appeared on the ground, gaining the attention of all those present in the room. Izuku was about to leave the room when she heard the sound of the magic circle being made in the room, and as she turned around, she saw a man in a burgundy suit as he took in a deep breath. It's been a long while since Riser has returned to the human world," the man said as he talked seemingly in the third person. Izuku took a deep breath as she noticed how Ria's body language had become very tense, as well as worry was apparent in her eyes. Izuku had been training under Sirzechs and Grafia in the weeks building up to her joining the school a few weeks back, but for some reason she felt a foreboding feeling brimming up in the back of her mind. Just then a new magic circle that Izuku recognized had shown up on the ground near them all as Riser clicked his tongue in exasperation. "Lady Rias, we need to talk about your marriage to Lord Riser Phoenix," Grafia said, as Izuku looked at them all. "What is it, Grafia?" Rias asked, confused as to why Riser was here now of all times. "Well, it's become apparent that as there is someone new to the family of Gremory, you are no longer the next heir to the family," Grafia said, as Izuku became much more fearful. Rias noticed the underlying tone of the voice Grafius said, as she looked over at Izuku, who was now trying to hide herself behind the couch and most likely not be noticed by everyone. So what you're telling me is that the marriage that was placed on me is now null and void? Rias questioned, looking more confused than anything. But there was one apparent look on the young woman's face, as it was noticeable to Izuku alone. Relief, but Izuku was now aware that she was now on the chopping block. Yes, Rias-sama. But the new problem for your family, Izuku, Midoriya Gremory. Since she was the next found child within the Gremory family, that means that any of the 72 pillars of the Devil Society can ask for her hand in marriage. Grafius said, as Riser became much more angered. Why is this happening? It was set on paper. Why is it being null and voided now? Riser asked, looking at the strongest queen with a look of fury. It wasn't my choice, Riser-sama. It was the High Council of Devils. They had decided that you were not to be married off to Rias-sama, but rather, Grafius said, growling her words out angrily as she pointed towards Izuku, who was still hiding behind the couch. Riser got a look at the new girl he hadn't noticed until now. She had much more magic behind the fearful look on her face. But her green and crimson hair that was filled with curls made him take a closer look at the girl, as well as her body type. The same size melons as Rias, same proportions as Rias, but with a different eye color, freckles on her face in the shape of diamonds, not to mention the seemingly innocent look on her face. I guess I can work with this. Never dated a 16-year-old girl before. Riser said before stepping back. Did I get a say in this? Izuku asked, her voice tiny. Whatever do you mean, Izuku-sama? Grafia asked, as Izuku looked at them. I don't want to get married off like this. Can I marry someone I longing? Izuku asked, as she looked at Grafia with a look of betrayal. As far as I am aware, the elder devils from the 72 remaining pillars power reign supreme in our government of our society within the Underworld. I'm sorry, Grafius said, as Izuku looked at Riser. Just to let you know, I'm only turning 15 later on this year. Izuku muttered as Riser spat out his tea. 15, he called out angrily. Yes, Izuku-sama is only 15 years old as of July 15th later on next month. Grafius said, as Riser stared at Izuku. That means that they were wanting to give me a fresh young girl. Those BSDRDS. Make this marriage null and void, Grafia. I would rather take the life of a 15-year-old girl away from them. I would rather date someone who is around my own age. Riser said, unknowingly stating that Izuku wasn't enough for him. So what is Izuku not enough for you, Riser? Rias asked, more like blurted out unconsciously. What are you doing, Rias-san? Izuku whisper-screamed at Rias. I don't know, it just came out. Rias said, as Grafia looked at Riser. I do not find her enough. She has a lovely body that I would love to F 3 ways to Sunday. But it is the age that I would prefer to stay away from. She is too young to even be in a marriage right now. Why do you think I gave you until your 18th birthday in order to live your life out? Riser asked, looking more soft than anything she'd seen before. Looking at Izuku specifically, Riser walked over to the girl as she stared up at him with a bewildered expression as well as a slight blush on her face. That is, if she isn't against this marriage between us both. Riser said, causing the girl to look away and mutter, I don't want to marry you. I would rather marry someone else. Izuku muttered as Riser nodded. Very well, I will make sure that they change who you are arranged to marry. Grafius said, as she teleported away. Riser looked at Rias and Issei now. Both were glaring at the man as if he had killed their unassuming dog. I still want to marry you, Rias Gremory, but I can't do that if you are free from me. I will make sure that you are placed back in an arranged marriage with me soon. But you better make sure that you stay nearby so that I can take you away. Riser said, disappearing into another magic circle. With that done, Rias growled out in her anger as she let out a pulse of destruction that Izuku countered with her own to cause the destruction happening to the room to be toned down. Shaking her head, Izuku sat down on the couch as she thought about everything that happened so far. So, I have no choice in who I get to marry. That is something that was banned in my world. Izuku said, as everyone looked to her. What do you mean? Rias questioned as Izuku explained further. In my world, people would marry one another in arranged marriages. We called them quirk marriages, and they were made for the sole longing to create a much more powerful quirk than that of the two being mixed together. Izuku said, as she listened to the others make comments. So quirk marriages were the same as arranged marriages here, but what makes them so horrible compared to ours? Rias asked, as Izuku grimaced. I was the product of my parents being in a quirk marriage. Izuku said, as she looked at her hands. Wait, you're a product of that. I thought you didn't have a quirk in your world. Rias asked, as Izuku nodded. I was deemed as a failure by my father, but my mother stayed by my side the entire time. My father had wanted to have a perfect mix of pyromancy and telekinesis, one where I could literally pull fires away from buildings as well as consume them with the fire-breathing aspect of his quirk. He was the number 25 hero of the United States in my world, and he married my mother from Japan because he wanted a child who could wield fire and telekinetic powers at the same time. But since I was a failure, he left my mom and me. He paid child support, but that was all he did. He pretty much abandoned us. Izuku said, rubbing her left arm. What does quirk marriages have to do with arranged marriages, though? Kaneko asked, as Izuku decided to state her reasons why. Because even if I had not been born quirkless, I would have been forced into a quirk marriage by my own father, since I have the genetics of my mother. I wouldn't be able to escape it, since all he would have to do is come grab me and take me to America, where it is much more common, and force me into it there. Izuku said, as Kaneko sadly looked away. So in a way you were like Rias Bucho. You were stuck in a rock and a hard place in terms of who you wish to marry, but why are you saying no to an arranged marriage? If it's for the good of the Devil Society, since your numbers are low, wouldn't that mean you are sacrificing your freedom to repopulate? Issei asked, seemingly confused. Issei, being forced into a loveless marriage is not something most people would want. Rias said, as Issei looked even more confused. What are you talking about? If you asked any guy if they wanted to be married to you, they would really jump in on it. Issei said, as Rias looked at him with a deadpan expression. That right there is why you men all just jump straight into it without any kind of plan of how you're going to continue your life with us. Izuku is right to be worried about her future right now because of the fact that she is literally a year younger than your Issei. She just started her high school life here in the human world, and she is being forced into a loveless marriage against her will. They're taking her freedom of choice. Rias said, as Issei nodded. Sorry for the insensitive comment. Just wondering why devils wouldn't care about topics like that. I mean, not like anyone would like me. I'm a hopeless pervert who talks about melons all the time. Issei said, as he pouted. I'm sure you'd find someone who likes you for you, Issei. Izuku said, as she raised her arm in a cheerful way. Thanks, but that's not possible. The last date I was on ended badly. Issei said, as he looked pained. Are you all right, Issei? Izuku asked, standing up and looking into his eyes. I'm fine, just bad memories coming up from before I met you all. I will be heading home, Bucho. See you at school tomorrow, Izuchan. Issei called out as Izuku called back and saying goodnight. Izuku was then seen in her own bedroom that Rias had given her. She hadn't known how to live in this version of Earth, but she wouldn't put it off for the worst. She just needed to make sure that she could keep herself safe from arranged marriages that will be loveless. In the underworld, a young man who was very muscular in frame had looked at a small letter where it had his name on it. Opening it up, he found the letter being from the Gremory family as they talked about how he had an arranged marriage set up by his father. The young man growled in anger at how this was done to him at this point in his life. He was 19 years of age, just a year older than his cousin, but something was off about this letter. It had a picture of the person who he would be marrying in a forced marriage, and as he looked at the image, he found a cute green and crimson-haired girl who had proportions similar to both Rias and her queen. She was shorter than him based on the picture, as she was seemingly around only 5 feet 2 inches compared to his own 6 feet 3 inches. He smiled at how adorable the girl looked in the image, but there was something about her that made him think twice about rejecting this girl. Looking closer at her image, he noticed that there was something behind her eyes that seemed to make him worry about her. He had seen fake expressions before, And this smile on her face, it was incredibly so fake that he almost thought at first glance that it was real. That was how good she was at hiding her real feelings about something. And as he stood up from his chair, he had one mission on his mind. We look upwards to see that there was a fire in his violet eyes as he walked towards the kitchen of his home, where his peerage was waiting for him. His queen looked at him with confusion as she then took notice of the letter in his hands as she walked over to him. "What's wrong, Sairaorg?" she questioned as the man, now named Sairaorg, gave a sad smile. "I've been selected to marry Izuku, Midoriya, Gremory," Sairaorg said, as he looked pained at the image. His queen had taken the photo and looked closely at her eyes as he instructed and noticed a hidden emotion behind them. "From what this seems, she is putting up a front. What are you going to do?" she asked as Sairaorg smiled. "I'm going to help her. That is what a Satan would do, right?" Sairaorg asked as he left the room. Izuku and the rest of the ORC were moving their way up a small hill as they were heading to a training ground for the Gremory family. Izuku had been carrying a lot of heavy weights inside a massive backpack that she had prepared herself for her physical training. In fact, the amount she was carrying was far more than Kaneko at the moment, and she was walking casually as if it was a normal Tuesday, and I am referring to Kaneko here. Izuku was struggling to make it up the mountain without even falling over with her own bag, but she pushed through the pain of the strength training she was undergoing. She was walking by a stressed Issei as the young man looked at her with both awe as well as concern as Izuku was struggling. "Are you sure you can handle that?" Issei asked as Izuku smiled at him. "I had to carry even more of this during my first few days of training under Sirzechs, but I think I should call him either Big Brother or Dad. I don't know. I will ask Rias later," Izuku said, before muttering to herself, completely forgetting she was carrying her load on her back. She continued to mutter to herself about who or what about who she should call her father when she had made it to the top of the hill and looked back at Rias and Akino, who were placing their bags on the steps to the vacation house. As both king and queen of the peerage smiled at Izuku, the girl blushed before moving her bag over to the ground next to theirs. "So why is Big Brother telling you to train yourself like this? Surely you have enough power on your own in order to defeat Riser," Rias asked, as Izuku shook her head. "I may have more raw power than Riser, but that doesn't mean that I have the same exact amount of experience than the man himself. He has more fights under his belt than I do, and I was bullied in my world," Izuku said, bluntly as Rias looked at her. "Did you not fight back?" she questioned as Izuku shrugged her shoulders. "If I did, I would be the one in trouble for hurting their star student. Not like that would have done a fat load of anything. I was getting horrible grades because the school system was favoring a student who had a better quirk than one who didn't have one," Izuku said, before she started to mutter off her anger about her original school. As the girl was in her own little world, Rias had gotten the attention of her peerage, although Kiba was not seemingly paying attention to half of it. So in order to have everyone training and doing their very best in order to get stronger, she had Kiba fight Issei in order to gauge their power as well as strength compared to one another. As the two move around the small area they were given to spar, Issei made sure to call out his sacred gear in order to collect as much power as possible. Izuku kept an eye on both combatants as she started to write down each of their stances. Issei's stance was more open, but at the same time showed he had experience in fighting. Kiba's was more aggressive, but at the same time showed that he had been trained by a very good swordsman. Izuku thought about the weapon she had earned herself the other day as she thought about the Yamato no Orochi blade she had managed to tame. She then pulled out her blade for a moment before placing it inside her dimension for holding her weapons. Watching the fight commence, she watched as both combatants had disappeared and reappeared in front of the other clashing. Kiba's wooden blade on Issei's metallic claw as they made a very small shockwave that was nothing to the shockwaves that All Might could produce with just air pressure. The fight continued, at least until Issei had reached the limits his sacred gear could provide him with power, and as soon as Kiba landed a singular hit, the boosted gear had stated a single word: reset. When everyone then learned what they would be doing for training, they all realized that they would have to get Issei up to par in terms of strength, speed, and magical prowess. Izuku was just going to increase her own abilities with her magic as well as strength. She wanted to be as physically strong as possible in the event she needed to defend herself. Not to mention that her own magical abilities were very good compared to Rias. Although the older girl was much more experienced with her magic, she had really only used it linearly. Izuku could use the power in different ways whilst Rias focused on power, and the ways Izuku learned to use the power of destruction was through trial and error. She learned that she could split up the full power ball of destruction into miniature ball of magic and sent them all in different directions in order to use them to train her reflexes. Once she was able to dodge each and every one she created, she would increase the speed of which they would fly about her in order to catch herself off guard. The faster she could react to something, the better fighter she could become in the future. She was completely unaware of the fact that when she does things like this, she would be considered a prodigy. She then learned over her time training with Sirzechs that she could create a new Super Devil form when she gained the status of Super Devil. Sirzechs stated that this form had been able to bring forth all the magical power that a devil could hold within them, and uses that power as an aura to protect them from any incoming damage. For the Gremory family, his own power of destruction was so strong that he could use it in his Super Devil form to act as a barrier of its own to stop any and all physical and magical attacks on him. Each and every attack thrown at him would simply just be disintegrated from existence, and nobody had a chance if they were to touch it from his own magical stores of energy. So she was working on controlling the power she held within herself, and increased it daily with using it almost every moment of every day. By now, her magical power was on par with that of a bottom tier of the entrance into Ultimate Class Devils. She was on the area where she could take a test and be placed into the low Ultimate Class Devil rankings within the Underworld. She had also watched how Sirzechs used his magical power and used it in similar ways to him, as he was visibly happier when she used it similarly to him. But as of right now, she wanted to make a new move that was all from her. She was thinking of ways to increase her own power with the power of destruction to increase her own physical strength using the magic itself. As she was still outside whilst Rias and her peerage were inside, making dinner, as well as taking a bath with one another, she was thinking about how All Might must be feeling at the moment. I'm sure that he is wondering what happened to me at this point of time. But at the same time, I can't help but feel like he was lying to me about passing his power on to me. Izuku thought aloud, thinking nobody could hear her. As she continued to train herself, she started to let her power of destruction flow throughout her body as she felt it enter her muscle fibers as well as bones. Going from her head to her neck, down her torso and melons, and down further on her arms as well as legs, she felt the warmth the power gave her. As she opened her eyes, they had gone from an emerald teal color to now a BLD red color as she looked at her surroundings. Looking at her hands and body, she had noticed that her fingernails were slightly sharper as she looked at her body. Her form was much sharper, but at the same time, for some reason, she was looking much more desirable. Does becoming a devil just make my proportions that much better than I was before? Izuku muttered to herself. She was in the middle of a mutter storm when a voice called out to her from behind, and as she looked behind herself, she saw a very muscular man looking at her with wide eyes. "Oh, sorry. Do you know where Rias is? I would like to talk to her about something important," the man asked, as Izuku looked at the man better. He was taller than her, making her look much shorter due to his height. She could easily guess he was 6 feet 3 inches in height. He had brown hair that was short, but at the same time, she found herself lost in his violet eyes. He waved his hand in front of her eyes in order to catch his attention as Izuku shook herself out of her reverie as she pointed at the building as she started to blush. SSS, she's inside the building. TT taking a BBA bath, Izuku said, running away from the man. The man watched her go as he chuckled softly at her demeanor. As he walked away, Izuku never heard him speak the words. "Well, never thought that my soon-to-be fiancé, even though I don't like that, was so shy," he muttered to himself as he entered the building nearby. Izuku would enter the building later on that night, as soon as she fixed her mind, as well as worked harder on controlling her power. As she entered the kitchen, She found Rias and the others talking to one another with somewhat concerned expressions on their faces. But for some reason, they were completely solemn about something that she wanted to get to the bottom of immediately. So what's up, guys? I know that you are all solemn because of something, so what is it? Izuku questioned as she sat down next to Kaneko. This has to do with your arranged marriage, Rias said as she looked at a letter. What's wrong? If it's Riser, then I think I can defeat him and his peerage on my own, Izuku said as Rias shook her head. Riser had informed that he wouldn't be marrying you, Izuku. He has changed his engagement papers to being with me again. But this time we will be waiting until we are ready to consummate the marriage, meaning I have all the time I can get right now to make sure we are powerful enough to keep ourselves out of the marriage. But this has to do with the person replacing Riser Phoenix as your betrothed, Rias said as she grimaced. Who is the replacement? Izuku asked as she looked more and more confused. His name is Sairaorg Bael, and he is my cousin, Rias said as Izuku looked at her in confusion. Okay, and the problem is? Izuku asked as Rias looked at Izuku. My cousin is the strongest young devil. He has a full peerage at this point in time, and you're nowhere as powerful as he is. He is what all young devils strive to become as soon as they start training, not to mention that I don't even know what that will do to our family genetics, Rias said as Izuku thought about this Sairaorg person. Yeah, you may be right on genetics, but I'm not a real member of your family, Rias. So my genetics won't be the exact same as if it would be you or him getting married. But who is he as a person? Izuku asked as Rias gave a good explanation. He is a very strong-willed man. He has been making sure to try and cure his mother for a very rare but dangerous disease for us devils. His mother has been ailed with this devil's curse for many years now, and there is no known cure for it. He has adopted the Gremory family's way of becoming similar to family with his own peerage. But if anything, it's how he became strong that should make you worried, Rias said as Izuku thought about it further. I may not be a fan of arranged marriages, but this seems like it would be a win for me in general, Izuku said as everyone looked at her like she was crazy. What do you mean that this would be a win for you in specifics? Akino asked, looking incredulous. Well, if you think about it, I will have a very strong partner, a man who has trained himself to become as strong as possible. I am training to become as strong as I can possibly be, not to mention the fact that his family birthed the Gremory family's power of destruction magic in its purest form. He will be literally the perfect partner for me to learn the ropes of being a devil as well as getting stronger from his guidance. He would be more like a mentor to me now than he would be a husband. Not that I wouldn't mind marrying him, I just need to see him in person, Izuku said as Rias gave a very descriptive summary of what the young man looked like. Wait, so he was the guy who asked me where you were earlier today? Izuku asked as Rias thought about it before nodding innocently. Izuku just sat there for a moment before a blush came over her face as she passed out on the spot, as she remembered the embarrassing thing she did before Sairaorg Bael. Izuku, everyone at the table called out, as soon as they found her on the ground with swirls in her eyes. It had officially been 10 days since the training to become even stronger than before had begun. Izuku and the rest of Rias' peerage had trained themselves to become as strong as possible, with Izuku giving Rias some training tips in order to increase the young woman's power and strength. It was here that Izuku and Rias stood outside of the ORC as they looked at those who would be entering the battle against Riser. If you want, I can temporarily join your peerage. That way we can make sure that it's a full win against him, Izuku said as Rias looked at the young woman. I will take any help I can get. I can only give you a spare bishop piece. That way you can use even more magic at your disposal. Not to mention, I already have 2 bishop pieces, Rias said as Izuku nodded. Grafia had appeared in front of the group as she took notice of Izuku holding a bishop piece as the woman looked at Rias. Are you sure that you want outside help of another devil on your team? Grafia asked as Rias nodded. The more help I can have, the better chances we have at defeating Riser, Rias said as Grafia nodded. All right, so long as you know what the end goal of this is. If she joins your peerage for even one rating game, any punishments that is upon you will fall to her. Grafius said, as Rias nodded. So long as Rias is saved from a marriage that she doesn't wish to hold, then I am happy to help. I mean, how else should a hero save people? Izuku asked, as Rias smiled at Izuku. The group are then teleported into the raiding game arena as Rias gets right up into the whole plan they were supposed to make. Whatever Riser would be planning, it would be up to his little sister to make the plans in order to take her on, which means that Riser himself will take her less seriously in the raiding game. She would take that into her own advantage by hiding Izuku as much as possible from Riser, as well as his own peerage. If Izuku can arrive and land a significant blow to the man, then that could change the tide of battle if she can continuously land decisive blows against the Phoenix heir. Once the group had decided their plan, Izuku was told to stay with Rias and Asia in order to make sure that they can plan in peace. Issei, Kaneko, and Kiba all left the building to head to their respective locations to begin their parts of the plan. Akino was placed to be not too far from Issei and Kaneko, whilst Kiba was located in the forest nearby the ORC building. Izuku looked at each and every screen that was shown inside the Occult Research Club room, as they kept an eye on everything. The battle for Issei and Kaneko taking over the gym was soon underway, as the young pervert had managed to take down a couple of pawns on his lonesome with some new move he gained as well. Once Kaneko had defeated the Rook and pulled Issei away, the gym was destroyed by Akino as she smiled down upon Issei and Kaneko. 3 pawns as well as 1 rook from Riser Phoenix has been defeated. Izuku used her magic to create a small shield over Issei and Kaneko to protect them from any new threats coming in from afar. And Izuku was glad she did, and that she learned how to create magic shield from Akino, as both Issei and Kaneko had stopped running and were subsequently blown up. Kaneko had taken most of the damage, but she was still in the fight as Issei was looking much better than the younger girl. They split up as soon as Akino had arrived and entered combat with the Queen of Riser Phoenix. Izuku stood up here as she knew something was up with this new woman. She left the area, with Rias screaming out her name as Izuku ran down the hallways and making her way over to where Akino was last seen. 4 pawns from Riser Phoenix has been defeated. As she was running towards Akino's last known location, she overheard that 4 pawns of Riser Phoenix had been defeated as she watched Kiba speed away from his location. Izuku was glad she left as early on as she originally did, because as soon as she arrived, she had come up upon Akino, who was clearly running on fumes, as the enemy queen was rejuvenated by a healing item that she brought out from between her melons. That really hurt, Queen of Gremory, but you won't be alive to see the end of this match. The enemy queen called out, starting her magic. Izuku immediately shot out a blast of destruction towards the queen, who was taken aback at the appearance of what appeared to be Rias. Even Akino thought that Izuku was Rias for a moment, as the blast had completely destroyed Riser's queen's chance at defeating Akino. Queen of Riser Phoenix has been defeated. What are you doing here, Rias? Akino cried out, but was shocked at Izuku coming out of the brush. Shush. We cannot allow Riser to know that I'm here. Rias should still be at the ORC. Come on, I'll get Asia to heal you. Izuku said, pulling Akino away from the area. Once arriving at the ORC, Izuku ran into Rias, who was preparing to leave the room as she had gotten too antsy since her disappearance. What happened? I thought you were supposed to follow the plan. Rias yelled at Izuku. I couldn't allow Akino to be defeated early on. Even you know that you alone, fighting Riser, wouldn't have ended well. Izuku said, as Rias glared at Izuku. You couldn't have known that. Rias called out, as Izuku slapped Rias' face. What were you planning in the event that Riser goaded you out of the safety of your own base? Were you going to go after him when he told you that you couldn't win against him? Izuku questioned as Rias' glare turned into shame as she looked away. Rias, you're the king piece of this chess game. If you were to fight Riser and lose, you would be costing us this chance at saving you from a marriage that you don't even wish to happen. Just trust in your peerage. They can make a miracle come from nothing. Izuku said, as Rias nodded along. Izuku then stood up and left Asia to heal Akino for the time being, as she left the building in order to set up even more defenses. Where are you going? Rias asked, as Izuku stared back at the woman. To increase the defenses around the base. If I don't come back, that means that I took off to help Issei, Kaneko, and Kiba with their fight with the remaining forces of Riser. Or Riser had come here and somehow took me by surprise. Izuku said, leaving the room. As soon as Izuku entered the small forest nearby, she started to increase the number of traps around the place with the magic she had learned from Sirzechs, as well as Grafia, during her time before entering Kuoh Academy. Once she had completed her task, she moved out to see how the fight with Issei and the rest of Riser's peerage had gone. Unknown to her, though, Rias had left the building with Asia and a rejuvenated Akino and headed over towards the main school building to take the fight to Riser. Izuku had soon arrived at the battlefield between Issei, Kaneko, and Kiba against what remained on Riser's peerage. 3 opponents were able to be seen. Although Issei was fighting 2 opponents at the same time, Kaneko was having a hard time keeping up with another rook. Kiba was busy with another knight as he clashed blades as another knight came in for an attack on the young man. I need to make sure that whatever burden they're holding on themselves are dropped significantly. Izuku muttered to herself before raising a hand and forming a tiny ball of destruction. She had learned how to make her tiny ball of destruction so minuscule that they wouldn't be caught by the untrained eye, and by the time someone would notice them, they wouldn't have enough time to move away from it. Launching the attack towards the incoming knight that was about to strike down Kiba and eliminate him from the raiding game, the woman started to scream in agony as she was immediately taken out of the raiding game. Fun fact about Izuku's new technique: all the power that went into a singular ball of destruction, it retained all the damage it could possibly deal when placed in a minuscule ball. Knight of Riser Phoenix has been defeated. Once that person was defeated, the bishop had been looking around the battlefield in order to find any hidden warriors. But once she found nothing in the brush, she never noticed that Izuku had maneuvered herself to the point of which she could be seen just behind the pink dress girl. Izuku reached a hand out and placed it over the girl's face as she pulled the young woman into the brush behind the entire group, who had heard the slight scream the girl let out from being grabbed. Lady Phoenix, a rook called out, looking away from her fight, coincidentally causing her own demise. Keep your eyes on your opponent, Kaneko bluntly stated before landing a powerful jab into the woman's gut, taking her out of the game. Riser Phoenix's last rook has been defeated. Riser Phoenix's last remaining pawn has been defeated. All that remained of Riser's forces was his last remaining knight as they clashed blades with Kiba. With that stated, Izuku decided to allow Kiba to defeat his opponent on his own without her assistance in the battle. Looking at the pink frilly dress wearing Phoenix was now lying on the ground, Izuku pointed her hand at the young girl and blasted her with her magic. The last bishop of Riser Phoenix has been defeated. Once that was stated, Izuku, Kaneko, and Issei had all made their way over to the main school building as they prepared to take on Riser. But that was when they heard a massive explosion on top of the building, and they increased their speed to make it to the others. Please don't tell me that Rias went out against Riser on her own, Izuku screamed in her head. Arriving at the rooftop, Izuku soon found out that Riser had been blasted by Rias and Akino, as they were using whatever they had at their disposal in order to deal the most damage they could. But every time they landed a blow, he would just regenerate from the damage dealt to him every single time they would strike. This is getting ridiculous, Rias. Once I defeat your peerage on my own, I will finally take you into the marriage that we consummated, Riser called out before being blasted by Rias' magic again. For the last time, Riser, we will not fall to you, Rias screamed as she blasted him even more. Izuku moved behind the taller man as he continuously kept his eyes on Rias. He thought that Izuku wouldn't be in the raiding game and would just be watching. He wouldn't ever think that the young girl would help Rias, especially since the young woman was placed in a new arranged marriage. Just as Riser was about to taunt Rias again, a new communications display happened. The last member of Riser Phoenix's peerage has been defeated. Riser now looked outright pissed off as the man glared at Rias entirely with fury and rage. He raised his palm to the air as he channeled enough power to outright kill most of the people around Rias. She had immediately put up the strongest barrier she could make with Akino moving behind her and helping her out as well, with Asia healing them both from the damage they took. Once Riser had launched the blast at Rias and Aquino, Izuku decided that now was the perfect moment to strike, as she jumped into the air behind Riser, catching the attention of Rias and Aquino before they focused on the blast. Izuku reared her arm back in order to land a devastating blow to the man's neck, which would knock him out. But as soon as she threw her punch towards him, the man seemed to get a sixth sense as he turned his head at the last moment to look behind himself. And as soon as Izuku's punch was too close to the man for comfort, she watched as the man's eyes widened in shock before her punch landed square on his cheek, sending him from the rooftop to the ground below. Once he landed on the dirt below, Izuku flew over to Rias, as well as Aquino, as the blast was overpowering their shield, and once Izuku was right next to the trio, she used her magic to manipulate the magic and send it towards Riser. Once the man was back to standing up, he looked over where the girl was last and blinked before he felt unbearable heat hitting him from the side, sending him flying off in the distance. Izuku then flew over to where the man was now as she powered herself up as high as she could go as she landed in front of the downed Phoenix. Why are you going against what was decided for both the Gremory and Phoenix family? Riser screamed out as he stood. Well, that's because of one thing. I don't really like arranged marriages. They take the freedom that others have away from those who really need it. Izuku said, placing her hand in front of Riser and charged up a massive blast of destruction. As soon as she released her magic, Issei's voice could be heard from nearby, as a distinct voice came from his location as well. Dragon Shot, a familiar voice called out, as Izuku released her magic immediately. Looking over at the massive blast coming towards her and Riser, Izuku jumped out of the way and watched as Riser was completely engulfed within the blast as it was sent off into the distance before exploding. Looking in that direction, she watched closely to make sure that the man wouldn't be coming back towards them both with fury written in his face. But something amazing was heard for Izuku, as Graphia's voice was heard over the intercom for the last time that evening. Riser Phoenix has been defeated. Rias Gremory and her peerage has won. Once that announcement was stated, Izuku watched from afar as Issei was hugged close by Rias as the woman happily smiled at the boy. She thanked him for helping in defeating Riser and preventing him from winning the battle against her, as well as Izuku. When all was said and done, everyone returned back to the ORC, where Graphia, as well as Sirzechs, smiled at both Rias and Izuku. You did great, you two. Now there's one problem we must discuss. Sirzechs stated as Rias looked at her brother. What's wrong? Rias asked, as the man looked at Izuku. We need to discuss the arranged marriage with Izuku and Sairaorg Bael. He has told us about how he wanted to meet up with Izuku at some point in the future just so that he could get some knowledge about the girl from the source. So within the next few weeks, building up to your rest PRD after your battle against Riser Phoenix, Izuku will need to meet up with Sairaorg in order to have a date with him. Sirzechs said, as Rias bristled at the comment. I cannot allow this. She doesn't like arranged marriages. Rias called out, as Izuku put a hand up to stop Rias. It's fine, Rias. I want to get to know Sairaorg Bael as well. If he wishes to treat me similarly to how Riser wanted to treat you as a trophy for himself, then I will make my decision to fight against him. But if he doesn't wish to do that, I don't mind it all that much. So long as I have at least some freedoms of choice, I'm fine with this arrangement. Izuku said, as Sirzechs nodded. It was the next day when Rias and her peerage celebrated their win against Riser Phoenix with Izuku within the Occult Research Club room. Izuku was drinking some tea that was made by Aquino as she thought about everything that was happening between her, as well as her friends. She was beginning to look up to Rias as an older sister figure, something she wished she had in her original world. Much less an older brother figure who was as kind as Sirzechs was to her. As much as she wanted those things in her world, she knew that it was impossible, especially with how her mother had been left alone to raise her quirkless daughter after being abandoned by her father. And, as she enjoyed the moment with the group, she was looking out the window at the nice scenery of the forest nearby. Walking out of the old school building where the club room was located, Izuku walked into the small forest as she looked over. Everything present. She smiled once she saw some birds flying about the area, as well as some rabbits jumping from tree root to tree root. Sitting down on the ground, she started to do something that All Might had told her would calm her mind whenever something was happening in her life that caused her mind to race. So as she sat on the ground in a small clearing of the forest, she let her mind continue racing as she meditated in peace and quiet, allowing only the sounds of the animals as well as forest reach her ears as she slowly started to levitate from the ground, letting her magic flow around her. A red aura formed around her body as her hair fluttered about in the wind that was generated from her, allowing her magic to roam free softly in the air. But she made it so weak that it would only generate a warm feeling from her and wouldn't harm the forest. She didn't want to accidentally kill some animal in forest life when she was letting out her magical power. As she meditated alone in the forest, a group of animals had come in her direction, looking at the new arrival within their home. A very curious bird had then flown over to the girl, who was very calm and at the same time in deep meditation as she focused on increasing her control over her power. As soon as it was super close to her hair, it felt all the warmth radiating from her body as it slowly but surely had placed some sticks in her hair and started to make a nest within her head of forest green and crimson red hair. Izuku had noticed that something was pecking at her hair and only smiled as she knew it was a small animal that was making a home in her hair. Letting out a soft breath of air, she allowed herself to be used as a small makeshift home for the bird as she continued to allow her emotions to flutter to the surface. Anger, hatred, sadness, fear, happiness, as well as smaller emotions such as indifference, disgust, concern, compassion, and many more were felt throughout the forest. It was enough that even Rias and her peerage had come outside to see what was projecting these mixes of feelings from the forest. And once Izuku had opened her eyes, she saw that the entire peerage had been watching her closely within her meditative state. "We noticed that you were letting out some emotions, and they were extremely complex. Can you tell us what was wrong?" Rias asked, sitting down in front of Izuku. "I'm fine, just trying to get control over the raging emotions within my mind. My mentor All Might told me that meditation was a great way to clear my mind of all thoughts, as well as allow myself to feel at peace," Izuku said as she was lowered to the ground. The bird that was seemingly asleep at her hair had decided that now was the time to leave after taking the sticks it held in Izuku's hair and flew off. "Well, at least we know that you would be a great person for animals to get to know," Kiba said offhandedly. This comment from the young man caused everyone to laugh at how hilariously right it was. Izuku chuckled softly as she remembered a time when she never had friends, and she could only think one thing as she chuckled with the others. Is this what having friends is like? Returning back to the ORC was calming as well as fun for Izuku, as the group had made some funny comments to one another in that time. Izuku sat down on the couch as she thought about the date she would be having with Sairaorg Bael within the next week and a half. She couldn't help but have a giddy feeling at finally finding someone who would take her out on a date. She was a girl as well, so she knew that going out on a date with a guy would eventually happen in her life, but she never knew it would happen so soon. She couldn't wait mentally for the day when a young man would take her out to get to know him and for him to know her. So, as the party was filled with jokes, cake as well as tea, Izuku had fun as she started to analyze them as a reference to become stronger herself. She even gave Issei some ideas for getting stronger so that he could increase his strength as well as power to use more of his sacred gear. It was the best kind of fun she could ever feel throughout the 10 years she had been without friends. She felt lighter as soon as she had informed them all about how growing up, she never really had friends. Only one who just tried to get her to stop trying to become a quirkless hero. But now that she was in a world where she could have power given to her, albeit from a means against her will, but to save her life at the same time, she was fine with it. She wished she knew how All Might was doing at this moment, since she wanted to let him know about what was happening at the moment. Going to bed that night, Izuku was preparing herself for the amount of schoolwork she would need to do later on in the week to catch up. Once she was back in classes once again, Izuku had heard that the ORC was going to be conducting their meeting within Issei's home for that day, since the club room was being cleaned. So as she went through the day, She couldn't help but smile whenever she sat near Keites, Murayama, and the other Kendo girls. They made sure that she had some other friends outside of the ORC so that she could talk to them about her adventures within the supernatural world. She was currently telling them about the fight against Riser Phoenix, who had been surprisingly tough in terms of physical strength, but much stronger in magic. So the fact she was capable of defeating him quite easily on her own was telling that her strength as well as power was increasing quickly. Once lunch was over, she had gone over to the Kendo club room as she trained with them to increase her ability of sword fighting. She wanted to learn as many fighting styles as possible, that way she wouldn't be relying on her magic most of the time. It was something that Rias had failed to learn when she was training her magical power over destruction. So, with Izuku learning how to fight with hand-to-hand combat as well as with bladed weapons, she was happy that she was increasing in experience as well as power. The time for the club to meet within Issei's home. Izuku and the rest of the peerage of Rias had soon made their way over to the young man's home. Knocking on the door, Miki Haidu, Issei's mother, had answered and smiled at the group of mostly girls. "Oh dear, it seems like my son is building himself up quite the HRM. Thank you all for spending time with my son, no matter how perverted he may be," Miki said as Issei groaned. "Don't worry about that, Haidu-san. Parents are supposed to be like this. My mom would react the same way," Izuku said, rubbing the boy's back. "Are you and Issei together?" Miki asked as Izuku blushed a bit. No. I'm just his friend. I'm not interested in him that way. I made sure to inform him of that when I first met him," Izuku said as Miki nodded. "Good. I wanted to make sure that you aren't using him to further your own relationship with someone else," Miki said as she left the group to make some tea as well as snacks. As the group started to celebrate their win against Riser in full, Izuku had noticed Miki coming up with a picture book of her son. And as the woman started talking about the boy growing up, Izuku couldn't help but smile at how innocent he was in the pictures. But something caught her as she saw something projecting holy energy behind Issei, as well as a little girl next to him in one of the pictures. It seemed as if she wasn't the only one who noticed it, as Kiba was staring at the picture himself with what could only be described as building anger. Izuku looked at the boy in confusion as well as worry before Issei asked the young man about what he was getting angry about. The two left the group of girls for a moment as they talked about the picture that Issei had been in with an old childhood friend. Izuku watched as Rias and the other girls were smiling at pictures of a baby Issei, with Asia and Rias having a much perverted reaction to it. Izuku was confused at that kind of thing, but she brushed it off as something devils do since they were creatures of sin. Izuku wasn't much of a religious fanatic, but she knew enough about religion that she had always steered clear of the more weird ones. She was never afraid of them, she was just unnerved from them back in her world, and just kept her distance from them. Her mother teaching her about stranger danger from a young age helped her with that. But as she took a closer look at the picture with the holy blade behind Issei, she was beginning to believe that there was something off about it. "Why is this blade giving me some kind of goosebumps?" Izuku muttered to herself as Miki noticed her strange behavior. "Are you all right, Midoriya-chan?" Miki asked as Izuku shook her head. "Sorry, just this blade in the picture was giving me an unsettling feeling in my stomach," Izuku said, giving the woman the picture. "Oh, that was Mr. Shido's weapon of choice. He called it Excalibur rapidly. It was an extremely powerful blade from what I can remember of my past with talking to the man. He originally tried to recruit Issei into coming to church with him and Irina a few times in the past, but we told him that it was Issei's choice ultimately. But other than that, he was a really kind fellow, if at times a bit of a fanatic," Miki said as she giggled. "Oh, well, at least Issei had a childhood friend growing up," Izuku said as she stared at the tan-hair girl in the picture. "Did you not have friends growing up as a child?" Miki asked, concerned. "Yeah, I did, but he didn't wish to be friends after he fell from a log in a small creek. We don't talk anymore," Izuku said as she held back tears. "Oh dear, just know that even with his perverted antics, my son will protect those he sees as his friends as well as family. I remember a time when that boy tried to protect Irina from another boy who had been bullying her," Miki said As Izuku felt her heart break even more at that. I wish I had someone like that growing up. Maybe then I wouldn't be as shy towards others. Izuku thought to herself, as a singular tear fell down the side of her face. Izuku left the small room she had went to bed in. She was preparing for the school day she was about to undergo. It was a final exams day for herself, as she was preparing to complete as much study time before the exams began. She was looking over all the classwork study guides for the exams as she drank some calming tea in order to keep her head in the game of the day. Rias had informed her that just the other day that 2 exorcists had come to Sona and informed her about a meeting that needed to happen. And it just so happened that Izuku got a message from Sairaorg that the young man would like to take her out on that date today, and she couldn't be any happier. She had never gotten a date like this before, and she wanted to make sure that she was extra prepared for it, and anything else that might happen. She wanted to know more about the young man, as well as anything that he knew about training to become as strong as he was without any form of magic to use. She had heard from Rias about how Sairaorg had become one of the strongest devils who hadn't reached devil maturity without using any form of magic except for what he learned from other races. It wasn't until later that evening after speaking to Rias on that specific day that she was told that Sairaorg couldn't wield the power that his family name gave. And Izuku was much more inclined to learn about the young man who had basically been abandoned by his family in all but presence. As she was focusing on the study guide on her small table, she never heard the door opening to reveal Rias and Akino bringing in some more tea. "Hey Izuku, we've come here to help you out on your final exam studies. You ready for our help?" Rias asked, as Izuku finally looked up at them. She had bags under her eyes as she wiped her eyes in order to fully wake herself up from being awake all night. "How long were you awake last night?" Rias asked as Izuku looked at the time. "Since about 3 in the morning. What? Is it wrong to study for upcoming tests at that time?" Izuku asked, as Rias and Akino stared at her in shock. Later on, that day, Izuku had managed to get some more sleep to cover the amount of time that she had not slept the previous night after certain final exams. She had felt that she managed to pass a few of them, but not all of them, and she was perfectly fine with it. Nobody was perfect in terms of grades, not unless you were a perfectionist, and maybe then you would be perfect. The young woman was moving about the school in search of the cafeteria since lunch had arrived, and Izuku was talking to some of the kendo girls. Their conversation eventually moved onto who out of the perverted trio they all would rather go out on a date with. Some of them were actually very happy that the specific perverted trio had stared at them whilst they changed from what Izuku heard. It apparently made the girls believe that they were able to be seen as just women, and Izuku couldn't help but chuckle at the complete irony of that statement. They punished the trio for peeping on them changing, but at the same time, they appreciated the leering looks of the trio. What was extremely surprising was how Kates and Murayama were very happy whenever Issei made comments about them. Based on what Izuku had heard from the duo, she thought that they really hated the young man and was basically placing the ORC girls under a spell to get them all to like him. When in fact, the opposite was in effect. The girls were currently trying to come up with a way to get Issei to state that he loved them like they loved him. It was simultaneously adorable, but at the same time very dangerous considering they all are forgetting about the fact that Issei was killed on a date with his first ever girlfriend. Taking her mind off of the whole Issei dating predicament, Izuku took a look at the clock and found out that it was nearing the time for her date with Sairaorg Bael. So as she left the Kendo Club locker room, she went to her bedroom and put on a green sundress that had purple accents. Not to mention a small cap for her head in order to make herself not appear as well known to the underworld. Once she had been fully prepared, Izuku had moved out into the main room of the ORC, only to come up upon the meeting between the exorcists as well as Rias peerage. "You think that I will be intimidated by exorcists who are technically trespassing onto my own territory that is shared with Sona Citri. You are aware who you are threatening, right?" Rias questioned as both exorcists stared at her. "I am very well aware of who you are, Rias Gremory, little sister of Sirzechs Lucifer," the blue-haired woman said as she glared at the woman. It was here that Izuku came out of the secondary room in a green and purple accented sundress, as well as a small cap over her head of curly green and black with some small pieces of crimson-colored hair. As she stared at the scene before herself in confusion, the others within the room stared at her in confusion as Issei stared at her in awe. "DMN, I hope Sairaorg is really hoping to marry you," Issei blurted out. Izuku blushed slightly from the praise as she summoned a magic circle and disappeared from the group, as well as the exorcists. "What in the world did we just witness?" the tan-haired exorcist questioned. "Something that isn't a part of our business. With that stated, I would rather leave and search for the missing Excalibur pieces that are within Gremory's territory," the blue-haired woman said, standing up. Once Izuku was within the Underworld, she found herself standing in front of the Gremory mansion as one of the maids came outside to see her standing there. "What are you doing here, Mr. Midoriya?" they asked as Izuku stared at them. Waiting for Sairaorg to come pick me up," Izuku asked, as the maid just simply sighed happily and walked away. It wasn't much longer before Sairaorg had arrived wearing some light casual wear and stopped in his tracks, seeing Izuku. "Wow, didn't think that you were going to look this good in a sundress," he said as he stared at her blushing face. "Same here. See, could we go on that date, please?" Izuku stated before asking. He didn't need to be told twice as he walked her over to his Underworld vehicle as they moved around the place as he showed her around. They moved around the capital city of Lucifer as they looked at all the buildings as well as all the stores. Sairaorg had also noticed that Izuku wasn't acting like most girls would whenever they saw stores about clothing as well as other things. She only got happy when she saw the comic book stores that depicted heroes, and he couldn't help but chuckle at how she really liked heroes. Their date was nice and quiet. They both appreciated the silence, as well as how the area seemed to be cleared whenever they moved about the city. Eventually, they reached a small restaurant that was having a great deal on food, as well as other amenities. Sitting down at a table, Izuku stared at the lined-up orders she could make on the paper with the food and other things. And as soon as she had found her favorite food on the list of other foods that the restaurant could make, she immediately placed it as her order. They talked about each other's lives up until this point, and Izuku kept quiet about her past in another world for a small amount of time before it just blurted out. "So did you have any friends growing up?" Sairaorg questioned as he ate some healthy sandwiches. "And not really. I didn't really have friends growing up," Izuku said as she stuck a small piece of her katsudon into her mouth and chewed. Sairaorg immediately knew to just stop asking questions about her past and change the subject to something they both really liked mutually. And surprisingly for him, they both really loved to train, and they even gave the other tips on how to use their powers with different reactions. Sairaorg was beginning to like the presence of Izuku nearby, and as soon as their meeting was completed, he stood up, paid for the food, and helped Izuku out of the building. They would walk down the walkways of Lucifer as they stared at the setting purple sun off in the distance, as they would talk about who were their idols. Sairaorg talked about how Sirzechs was his idol in terms of strength, and that he wanted to become a Satan just like him. With Izuku informing Sairaorg about her love of heroes, as well as her idol All Might, who she just called Toshinori Yagi since that was what he wished for her to call him. Sairaorg had heard about the training the young girl had taken in order to take an entrance exams for a hero school and gain a powerful quirk that her mentor was going to give her as a reward for getting in. But the simple fact that the young girl had been teleported into his world without ever attaining that dream, for some reason, he could feel the hurt in her words when she stated that. So he patted her head, through the cap, and told her that everything would be all right and that her mentor would make sure he is able to bring her back. Izuku had let out a massive quantity of tears at that, which caused Sairaorg to briefly sputter as well as throw his arms around to make sure that he didn't hurt the girl's feelings. Once Izuku had informed him that they were not tears of sadness, but of happiness, Sairaorg had finally calmed down as they both sat down on a small clearing of a park and stargazed as soon as they had come out. They talked about what they wished to become, as well as what they were doing to attain those dreams as well as wishes. It was here that Izuku asked Sairaorg a question that was on her mind for all of the years she was made fun of growing up. "Hey Sairaorg, do you think that a quirkless person could become a hero?" Izuku asked, as Sairaorg looked at her in concern. "I don't know, from what I have heard from you about what you did to become one. You prepared yourself both mentally as well as spiritually, but you forgot to prepare yourself physically. So if you didn't prepare yourself physically up until that entrance exam, I would tell you that you wouldn't be capable of doing that. But when you train to become better physically, I could easily say that you can become a hero. It would take some time to be acknowledged by the populace, but you might become one of the rising heroes as an underdog in the market of quirked heroes within your old world," Sairaorg said, as Izuku felt her heart skip a beat. "Do you think that I could become a hero for this world?" Izuku asked, as the young man looked at her closely. She had the toned musculature of a working woman who would get what she wanted through force. "Well, if you put your mind to it, I believe that you can easily become a hero. You just need to make sure that you have someone watching your back," Sairaorg said, as Izuku thought about it for a moment. "Well, maybe I already do have someone watching my back," she said, looking away with a blush. Sairaorg stared at her for a moment before letting out a chuckle, and as he moved his arm out over towards Izuku, the girl flinched slightly before relaxing in the presence of Sairaorg. "You all right? You flinched there for a moment," Sairaorg asked, looking into her eyes. "I am fine. Just please make sure you tell me that you're doing that next time," Izuku said, pouting. He laughed at that a little before sitting up from the ground and helping her up, but before she could be helped up, she looked at his hand as a small memory played out. "Kakin, are you okay?" A younger Izuku called out as she ran down a small hill to meet her friend. As her old friend had looked up at her, her hand outstretched to help him up from the ground. He stared at the hand for all but a moment before swatting it away and pushing her back from him as he called her out. "I don't need your help. I'm not useless like you are," Kakin called out before running away from the girl. Unknown to him, he had hurt the girl's feelings really bad there as she stood hurt mentally as she stared at her hand as if it had offended both him and her. Izuku watched as the hand transformed back from her smaller but much nicer palm, and as soon as she shook her head, she grabbed the hand and was helped up. Standing up to around just under his pecs, she followed him as they went on their way over to his Underworld vehicle. Getting inside of it, they drove off towards the Gremory mansion as they sat in the car quiet as can be. Once she was dropped off, Izuku thanked Sairaorg for the adventure and looked forward to another one in the future, if he was willing to have one. He informed her that he was planning on another one in the future and left her alone. But as he left, he looked at his hand as he thought about how Izuku's face gained a faraway look when she looked at his calloused hand. What was that about? He questioned himself before shaking his head. He had a fun time with Izuku and was now about to plan their next date so that he could see more of Izuku's smile. For some reason, it just filled his heart with so much joy when he saw the young girl smile, and he wouldn't have it any other way. After Izuku teleported back into the Kuoh Academy club room, she had sat down on the bed as she thought about the moment she shared with Sairaorg. "I can't believe that I went down on memory lane when I saw his hand. I am so stupid," Izuku cried out as she placed her face in a pillow. As she pulled the blankets around herself, she could only think about how much she thought she had embarrassed herself in front of the young man. She fell asleep a few minutes later as she focused on the mission she would be given over the next few days within the town of Kuoh. As the next came, and when Izuku was more focused on a certain skill she was building as she was working within the school, she had to find a way to create her own peerage soon as Sirzechs had given her a message about how she will need a peerage of her own within the Underworld. Izuku didn't really care about that at the moment, as she was focusing on a skill she had been working on ever since she found her love of heroes. She was currently inside her bedroom within the club room, drawing up a hero costume, as well as support items that would be required to be used in order to make them stronger. Specifically, what her hero costume would have been if she had the time to make it without her mother putting in an old one she had created when she had been younger. She had drawings of other heroes across the bedroom, as she was drawing her newest image of what she believed that she would look like in a hero costume. They were very lifelike, as she had moved her hand across the page with precision as well as grace. Within the next few minutes, Izuku had finished her own hero costume as she stared at it with a smile on her face as she stood up from her seat and walked towards the door. Opening the door, She was met with the faces of Rias and Akino, who were staring at the bedroom door. She opened up. "What's wrong?" Izuku asked, as Rias shook her head and brought Izuku with her. Though, as it would turn out, Rias and Akino were bringing Izuku on a shopping trip in order to get the young woman some clothes to wear outside of the school. Izuku didn't know why they wanted to get her some clothes, but she was very concerned with the amount the two were getting her. So imagine her surprise when she found Issei was next to her looking dead inside, as he held multiple bags of items that the two women had bought. "Are you sure that you can carry all of that, Issei-san?" Izuku asked, concerned. "Nope. I'm fine, just going to be extremely cautious whenever I go on a shopping run with girls," the young man said, as Izuku placed a hand on his shoulder. "Your date with Rainier, correct?" Izuku asked, as Issei nodded. "I'm sorry that she would do that to you. You shouldn't have been killed like that on your date. It was a completely horrific way to kill you," Izuku said as the young man smiled. "Thanks for the consolation, but we should probably catch up with them before they run out of space on their own arms," Issei said, as the two ran after their club vice as well as club captain. It was later on in the evening when Rias and her peerage were called out by a duke in order to take down a villainous stray devil who was killing random civilians after killing their MSTR and leaving them. It was here that Izuku noticed something off about Kiba, as the young man had kept to himself during the trip as well as stayed quiet. He was looking out into the distance, as if he was not paying attention to everything that was happening. He paid attention to when he was addressed, but at the same time, she couldn't help but feel as though he wasn't going to be in the entire battle. So against Rias' wishes, she left the two women and followed Issei and Kaneko, who entered the building with Kiba. As soon as she had caught up with the trio, they were surprised with Izuku's appearance, as the girl stated that she had a bad feeling and wanted to assist wherever necessary. Not long after teaming up, they had found the stray devil, and Izuku, through slapping Kiba's face in order to get him back in the game, had managed to send the stray devil out of the warehouse they chased it into. As soon as the devil had landed in front of Rias and Akino, the two blasted it to smithereens, only to hear Izuku, for some reason, questioning Kiba about why he was hesitating against the devilish creature. The young man didn't answer the young girl, but decided to just straight up ignore her, walking away from the area with a solemn expression on his face lining on rage. Izuku would teleport away, unfortunate to not see Rias scolding Kiba for his actions, as well as ignoring Izuku's worried questions. She wouldn't even be privy to the fact that Kiba was a devil reincarnation only because he wished for revenge against those who wronged him within the church. Sitting at her table, she could only think about what Kiba was struggling to get over through his mind. And as she focused on drawing a small image on the paper, she was interrupted from her musing as a hand poked her shoulder. Looking over it, she was face to face with two women, one with blue hair and a light green fringe on the front bang, as well as a tan-haired girl who was looking at her with confusion as well as concern. "Is there a reason why a devil is near our base of operations within this city?" the blue-haired girl asked, as Izuku stared at her for a second. "I'm sorry, but I was unaware that the church over there was private property. I can leave if you wish," Izuku asked, as the blue-haired girl glared at her harder. "Why are you acting kind? Aren't all devils supposed to be evil incarnate?" the blue-haired girl questioned. I don't know what you're talking about. I was forced to become a devil," Izuku said, looking at the woman with a pained expression. "If you wish to be freed from your servitude, then you will allow me to strike you down," the woman said, raising a clothed weapon. "Whoa, I never said that I didn't like being one. I just said that I was forced to become one. I was near death when I appeared in the Underworld, and Sirzechs Lucifer had saved my life from certain death," Izuku said, raising her hands in the air, as the blue-haired young woman glared at her harder. "What do you mean that he saved your life?" the tan-haired girl questioned. "I was extremely hurt and near death. I had broken every bone in my body, as well as torn certain parts of my body in order to break my fall from a massive mountain when I showed up in the Underworld. If Sirzechs wasn't there, I'd be dead," Izuku said, as the tan-haired girl looked at her worriedly. Eventually, the blue-haired woman had calmed down and allowed Izuku to enter the building and have some tea with the two. As it turned out, The trio would get along swimmingly as they had clicked really quickly. For Izuku, she liked how brash Zenovia was. That was after learning her name, as well as why she was an exorcist for the church. And as for Irina Shidu, Issei's old childhood friend, Izuku saw the airhead girl as someone to confide in, as the two had similar backgrounds. As for Zenovia's personality, it was brash with logic mixed inside of it, although there was some derpy moments from the young woman that reminded her of Kakin from her past. Irina was the childhood friend she never had, energetic as well as outgoing, all in a similar way she found Kakin was from before he started to wrong her. Shaking her head from bad memories, she started to draw some more images of heroes from her old world as the two walked over to look at them. They were surprised with how lifelike the heroes seemed, as well as some battle-damaged ones looked. Wow, that one looks like an orca whale from the marine life. How is it able to stand on legs? Irina questioned, looking at the developing image of Gang Orca. That is actually a human with a mutation core from my homeworld. His name is Sakamata Kuoh. He was the number 10 hero Gang Orca. He was one of the heroes who looked like a villain because of how he was viewed by the people of Japan. Izuku said, before going on a tangent about the man's quirk. For the remainder of the evening, Izuku would talk to the girls about her old home world, a world where she was technically quirkless, as well as waiting to return back home. She had wanted to learn how to become a hero under All Might's wing, but she just never thought it would turn out this way. As Izuku cleared up her things, she thanked the two for allowing her sanctum within their church so she could get out of the incoming rain. And as she left via magic circle, the two girls looked at one another before pulling up an image of a very tall, muscular man with blonde hair in two tufts, reminding them of a very large, oversized bunny. I think Pope Toshinori would like her, Zenovia said, as she and Irina had smiled at the goofy smiled man in the picture. Izuku appeared back in the apartment that Rias had given her within Kuoh town, and as she looked about the place, she couldn't help but start to giggle to herself. Pulling out a notebook from her pocket, she looked at the picture of her old mentor, who she had no clue where he was now, as she let out a few tears from her eyes. Her giggling turned into sobbing as she remembered everyone from her previous world, her mother, Kakin, and All Might, the only ones who actually acknowledged her presence. She would fall asleep for the night with tears streaming down her face as she kept having nightmares about her mother and All Might searching for her seemingly dead body. The next morning, Izuku started to make breakfast for herself when she had heard a sound of a knock coming from her front door. Walking over to it with confusion written on her face, she opened it only to be faced to white hair of a short young girl. "Kaneko-chan, what are you doing here?" Izuku asked as the girl looked at Izuku. "I smelt that you were making something to eat. Is it all right if I have some food from you?" Kaneko asked as Izuku sighed fondly. "Sure thing, Kaneko-chan. Just don't eat me out of house and home," Izuku said as Kaneko entered the apartment. Looking around the place, Kaneko noticed that there was some papers on the walls depicting someone who was very tall and muscular with two blonde tufts of hair over his head with a happy smile on his face. "Who is the buff guy?" she asked bluntly as Izuku noticed who the girl was talking about. "That's my mentor from the world I came from. His name is Toshinori Yagi, otherwise known in my world as All Might, the strongest hero within the earth," Izuku said, as she pulled out a picture of both herself and All Might the day of the entrance exams on Dagobah Beach. Showing the picture of the man to Kaneko, the young girl looked at how happy Izuku was in the image with a much taller man. "He looks like a Pefli," she said, without mercy, as Izuku comically fell onto the ground. As comical tears appeared in Izuku's eyes, she cried out as she started telling the smaller girl about the man's exploits as well as his heroism. She went on to talk about how great of a person the hero was, especially to those who had no powers as well as weaker powers than others. Kaneko heard Izuku talk about this All Might person as if she was a massive fan of the guy, but there was a hidden tone of something there. A want within the girl's voice as if she had wished for him to be her own father or something, but Kaneko just let it go. Izuku evidently just decided to make some pancakes for the girl as she made sure that they were filled with sugar, just like Kaneko loved. "Zero, Doido, The day at Kuoh was very nice and quiet for Izuku, as the young woman had been keeping to her regimen of training with the kendo girls within the school after school hours. She was increasing her skills with a bladed weapon and was wishing to be able to use a staff in order to learn many different weapons to use against opponents. By the time the kendo club was clearing out for the night, Izuku stayed near the school as she thought about everything that was going to be happening with Rias and the others. The exorcists were thinking about teaming up with the devils so that they could get their weapons back from the people who stole them in the first place. Izuku overheard some movement outside of the kendo club room as she found Issei and Kaneko talking to another boy, Jinchurusagi, if she remembers correctly, as they went out to search for the exorcists in order to assist them in their search. Shaking her head, Izuku kept to her training as she thought about everything that was happening in her life up until this point. She found friends, found someone who she might be able to like as a potential lover, and has power to protect herself and those she cares for. Leaving the school grounds, she walked through the town during the late evening as she thought about everything that was going wrong with Kiba. The young man had been just gone from the ORC since he heard about the Excaliburs being within Kuoh town and was on a manhunt for them. He wouldn't stop hunting the swords down until he had managed to destroy them. And as Izuku was thinking about how to get the boy to return back to Rias, and their friends, Izuku heard flapping wings behind herself. Looking behind herself, she found herself staring at someone who she thought was back in her original world. What are you doing here?" Izuku called out as a tall man with muscle fibers extending from his body landed behind her. "Who are you?" "I just came here to kill some wretched devils," the man said, as he revealed his 2 pairs of fallen angel wings. Izuku revealed her 4 pairs of devil wings as she stared at the new arrival with some kind of fury as she remembered who this man was. "Go to Imisuji, otherwise known as Muscular. What are you doing in this place? I thought that nobody from my world could come here," Izuku called out as the man extended his muscle fibers. "Don't worry about that, pretty lady. I'm going to make you bleed before I make you my beach," he called out, launching towards the girl with massive speed. As the two clashed in the air high above the town, looking around certain alleyways was Issei and Kaneko as they were in search of some fallen angels or people who were wielding Excalibur swords. Hearing some commotion above them all, they looked to the sky to find Izuku fighting a fallen angel, and seemingly both were a stalemate. The fallen angel kept throwing some light spears, as well as muscle-fibered beams of light energy. As Izuku kept dodging the attacks, she would throw her sword at the man many times as well as use her magic to swing the blade around much faster than she would with her normal hands. Each fiber of muscle was replaced almost as fast as it was being torn away from the man's body. But Izuku had a plan as she appeared behind the villainous man / fallen angel and sledgehammer strikes the man to the ground. As Issei and the others had jumped out of the way of the man, slamming into the ground, Izuku landed nearby as she lifted the fallen angel away from the ground before sending a kick to his gut, sending him ragdolling across the ground and towards the edge of the intersection. As the fallen angel was struggling to stand back up from his painful beating, Issei and some others had arrived to where Izuku was at and looked to her. "What happened, Midoriya?" Issei called out as Izuku looked at him. "This guy had attacked me out of the blue. What are you 3 doing out here? Shouldn't you be telling Rias about what your plans are?" Izuku questioned as all 3 people had started to look at her and worry. "Don't worry about me telling them right now, because I really need your assistance in taking this guy down. He might know where Kokabiel is located at this moment," Izuku said as the group nods and enters their fighting stance. As the small group of devils move towards the fallen angel in question, Issei stays back in order to collect enough power in order to put an end to the fallen one as fast as possible. Izuku and the others fight the fallen angel with great power as well as speed, Izuku flying around and blasting the villainous angel with all the power she can wield at the moment. As Goto Imisuji had noticed how Izuku was staying away from the man entirely, he smirked as he increased his muscle fibers around his body and charged the girl with his fists pointed towards her. As soon as magic circles appear on the edges of his fists, Light spears start to fly towards her as she uses a magic circle to defend herself in the onslaught of power. Holding off the large attack power of the spears, Izuku looks over to see Issei charging a massive ball of red energy as he started to charge towards the fallen angel. Izuku then moves towards Goto as she charges her own attack in order to combine it with Issei to finally put the villain down. As soon as Issei appears underneath the villain, he looks downward, finally noticing the pawn, pointing his hand towards him as he feels Izuku appearing above his own head as well. Izuku and Issei launch their attacks on both sides of the villain as he tries his best in order to defend against both attacks as they both scream out the names of their attacks. Dragon Shot, Destructive Implosion. As the villain was blasted towards the sky, Izuku managed to move out of the way just in the nick of time as the beam of red energy and the massive ball of orange energy had decided to finally implode in on itself and explode. With the villain taken care of, the squad of devils take a breather as they hear movement coming from their left, only to find that it was the exorcists as well as Kiba who had come overseeing the massive explosion above the town. Once they were nearby, Izuku sat there thinking about the last few days since her date with Sairaorg, and she could only state one thing. "I need another date," she said before passing out on the ground. Izuku and the exorcists with Kiba had moved on, leaving Issei and Kaneko to talk to the rest of Rias' peerage. She had been wanting to stay back in order to find out if the two devils wouldn't get in trouble on her behalf, but decided against it. If they got caught, it was their issue at the moment, and as of this moment, she was keeping up with the exorcists as well as Kiba without much issue. They had managed to pin down both Valper Galilei as well as Freed and entered a small skirmish with the two as they did their best to take him down. And with Izuku there to assist them all, they were successful in taking down Freed as he died to one of Izuku's destructive implosion spells, with the man scattered all over the ground. And surprisingly, with some of the Excalibur weapons on the ground with cracks on them, Kiba had managed to destroy one of the blades. Excalibur rapidly, to be exact. With that blade down and out of the game, Valper had managed to grab the other weapons before disappearing in a magic circle. And as the others tried to stop him, Izuku placed a hand on their shoulders, keeping them in place when they all heard a voice from above. "Well, it seems as though you were attacking my subordinates. I can't have that now, can I?" The voice called out, and everyone turned to see who it was. And almost as soon as they turned around, the mystery man attacked them all. Kiba was launched to the other side of town, the exorcists were dealt lethal blows, and Izuku was grabbed by the throat before being tossed down the way. "It has been a long time since I stretched out my wings," the man said, as Izuku struggled to stand back up. Looking at the man again, she noticed that the wings on his back were very different from some of the devil wings she had seen. His wings were feathered and black as night, but they were filthy in comparison to the black feathered wings she had seen from some other fallen angels she had come across. Glaring at the man now, she stuttered out a question which seemed to take his mind off of the exorcists who were bleeding out. "Why are you attacking Kuoh Town?" Izuku asked, gripping the dirt to help push her up. "Why am I attacking Kuoh Town?" "Well, I thought that would have been obvious. I am here to kill both Sonocitri as well as Rias Gremory to start another great war between heaven and hell," the man said, as Izuku took in the man's complexation. He was taller than her by a couple feet, and his power was as strong as Sairaorg if she went all out, not that she herself had seen Sairaorg go all out. He had long flowing black hair as well as red eyes and pointed ears. He was smirking at her with an expression she had no clue was meant for, and as soon as he stood in front of her, he grabbed her throat again. "I should really just kill you. You don't belong in this world. But I could have another use for you. Lure out the Princess of Ruin as well as the Red Dragon Emperor, and get them to fight me. It's been so unbearably boring since peace was brought up, and I can't wait until another war is started," the man said before licking Izuku's cheek. The girl then grimaced before moving her face away as much as possible as the man just giggled a bit. "Not to worry. I won't steal your chastity. I can leave that for later," the man said before he rose his arm to knock her out. "Remember my name, little devil. My name is Kokabiel, and I will be the one to make sure that war breaks out between the three factions of Christianity once more," Kokabiel said, before dropping his chopping hand on her nape. A few hours later, the Gremory peerage had finally made it where they believed that the exorcists, Izuku and Kuoh, were located. And what they were introduced to shocked them completely. Izuku was on the ground unconscious with a slightly torn shirt. The exorcists were bleeding slightly from their injuries, and Kuoh was nowhere in sight. Sona and Rias gathered each of their peerages to the location as they gathered those who were injured, and after making sure Izuku was all right, placed her behind themselves when a magic power made itself known to them. Looking to the air, Kokabiel had shown himself to them all as he declared war on them before telling them about keeping the town safe from his attack. As soon as his warning was given, he flew off towards Kuoh Academy as he was building whatever Excalibur was from the pieces that weren't destroyed by Izuku. As that had happened, everyone had moved over to where the glowing golden light was shining at Kuoh Academy to start their defense of Kuoh Town, whilst Rias and her peerage had fought Kokabiel inside the barrier. Izuku as laying on the ground outside of the barrier provided by Sona and her entire peerage. It wasn't until the battle against the powerful fallen cadre had reached its highest point, of which Kuoh had attained his balance breaker, that Izuku had woken up from her slumber. Once she had fully woken up and found out what in the world had happened, she looked to Sona as the woman only glared half-heartedly at the young woman. "You're only going to get in the way, Midoriya," Sona said, as Izuku shook her head. "Don't worry about me. It's my job to make sure that the others don't die," Izuku said as she entered through the barrier. Running over to where the battle was about to start over again, she soon stood next to Rias as the young woman smiled at her. "I knew that you'd wake up soon. I just hoped that your appearance would assist in taking down Kokabiel," Rias said, as Izuku powered up her power of destruction aura. Rias did the same as Akino followed suit. And just as Izuku was about to blast herself over to Kokabiel in order to do everything in her power to at least defeat Kokabiel, she felt something touch her back and a massive well of power build up inside her. Izuku let out a slight gasp as she felt the power course through her body as she floated even higher in the air. "Why did you give it to her? Isn't she weaker than the prodigy of the Gremory family?" Kokabiel questioned confusedly. "Nope. It turns out that Izuku herself is a much better prodigy with my family's power of destruction, capable of controlling the power as if she had been born with it her entire life. Meet my niece, Midoriya Gremory, Izuku," Rias said, smirking as Izuku revealed her 8 devil wings. As Kokabiel had seen the number, he kept a close eye on the color of the wings since normal devils had black-colored wings. Sirzechs was an outlier with his crimson-colored wings with black outlines. Izuku had a lime-green-colored wings with black outlines. He had to say to himself mentally that Izuku's emerald green wings with black outlines had to be the most appealing he had ever seen from devils in his lifetime. Izuku's eyes glowed with power as she summoned multiple small balls of her power and thrusted them towards Kokabiel with terrifying speed. The cadre was only able to dodge them by the skin of his teeth since he had the experience to not take her lightly. The two then met in the middle of the battlefield as they clashed fists, creating a shockwave of wind breaking the ground apart. Flying faster than the eye could see, Izuku and Kokabiel had attacked and countered one another hundreds of times in the sky, as Izuku gained control over the roaring power of the Red Dragon Emperor coursing through her veins. Once it reached its peak, Izuku felt that her power was starting to wane, and she knew immediately that once it started to lower itself, she would be essentially out of strength. To fight. Seeking to end the fight as fast as possible, Izuku had powered up to her maximum with Issei's collected power pushing her to even higher heights. Izuku collected enough of her magical power into a small beam forming in the middle of her hands as she pointed them at Kokabiel, who was charging his very own attack. His light beam of energy was charging in his hands as he was believing that he should use his best attack in his arsenal, aside from his prowess with light-based weaponry. As Izuku felt her power begin to drop, and fast, she decided to release all the collected power in her hands and shout out the name on the spot. Draconic Devil's Light. Izuku screamed out, as a beam of emerald and crimson energy blasted out from her hands. The beam was massive compared to her small frame as it barreled towards the cadre, who was preparing to blast his own beam of light. I can't believe that you are this prodigious in the power of destruction from the Gremory family. But this is where you fall, Gremory. Hand of God. Kokabiel yelled as a massive blast of holy energy flew from his own hands. As the beams closed in on one another, everyone on the ground felt the wave of wind being pushed apart in the sky as they finally clashed. Both fighters landed on the ground as the beams of energy broke apart the earth they were pushing against one another on. Rias and the others moved high in the air as they did their best to stay out of Izuku's way so she could focus her power on pushing Kokabiel into running out of power. But for what Izuku was struggling with, her power was waning and fast. So Rias moved over next to Izuku and powered up her own attack, being a massive ball of destruction. Launching her own attack into the power of Izuku's beam, it provided enough of a push to put it back into a perfect clash between the two beams. Issei then stood up and ran towards Izuku, as he then stood next to her as he looked to his sacred gear. Drake, do we have enough power to overwhelm Kokabiel? Issei asked, as he pointed his gauntlet glove towards the fallen cadre. Do you all really think you could defeat me together? Kokabiel questioned as he heard an attack name called out behind him. Sword BRTH. Kiba called out, as a massive torrent of blades broke through the ground and tried to slam into Kokabiel from behind. But as the fallen cadre broke each sword from the young man's AoE attack, the young man continued on as he did his best to distract the fallen. Akino then stood up behind Kiba as she blasted millions of volts of holy lightning at the fallen cadre. Holy retribution, she called out, as Kokabiel felt his entire body twitch in slight pain. No chance, you have no chance. Kokabiel called out, releasing a wave of wind behind himself with his wings. The power of the attack sent both Kiba and Akino flying into two separate buildings behind himself unconscious. Akino, Kiba, Issei called out as he called upon his sacred gear to power himself up even more. The power of this gauntlet responds to your will, your wishes, as well as a longing, not a need. But we can push this out until we can overwhelm a partner. Give him everything you got and show him what it means to be the Red Dragon Emperor. Drake called out as Issei screamed out his own attack name. Dragon Blaster. Issei called out as a massive red beam of energy had combined with Rias and Izuku's attacks. Kokabiel struggled slightly to push their combined beam of energy away, but unlike the trio, he had nobody helping him in keeping the struggle. And once he put too much effort to try and push the energy away, he was completely and utterly overwhelmed by the power of the trio. As the beam had pushed all the way back to him, he let out a screech of pain as the beam pushed through his body and surrounded him, lifting him straight up into the air. Greawa! This isn't the end of me. Kokabiel screamed out in agony as the beam of energy had exploded in the air near the barrier surrounding the school grounds. The beam had ended. Izuku collapsed to the ground as she laid there panting as she used up everything she had in order to push back Kokabiel away from them. Issei and Rias took a knee as they thought about their win against such a being like Kokabiel, and as the two were about to celebrate their win, Kokabiel's body had fallen to the ground burned, and the man himself was missing an arm. As he stood back up, he glared at the trio with every amount of hate he could muster up as he growled angrily towards them. There is no possible way that you three pissants could have defeated me. I am the one who killed the four Satans, as well as saw the death of God himself. There is no possible way that I was defeated by 3 children in high school. Kokabiel raged out as he charged a massive light spear in the air. As the light spear was growing in height as well as power, Rias and Issei guarded the downed Izuku as she struggled to try and pick herself up from the ground. And once the cadre was about to throw his light spear at the trio, the barrier surrounding them all had broken to pieces. Looking up from where he was standing, Kokabiel had stared at the new arrival in complete confusion as well as seemingly worry. "What are you doing here, White Dragon Emperor?" Kokabiel called out from the ground. To think that someone as powerful and experienced as he was nearly put down by a bunch of children playing hero. "I'm deeply soured by my initial impression of you, old man. But if you must know, I am here to bring you back kicking and screaming to Azazel," the new arrival said, as his white armor glistened in the sky. And faster than everyone present at the battlefield could register, the armored individual had disappeared and reappeared behind Kokabiel, tearing his wings from his back. "Your wings are filthy in a disgusting shade of black. Meanwhile, Azazel's wings are appealing in a color of midnight and a much better state. You deserve to be treated this way, Kokabiel. As for now, you will be treated to be frozen in the depths of Tartarus," the man said, as he flew into the air with the unconscious cadre. "So you're just going to ignore me, Albion?" Drake's voice called out from Issei's hand. "Drake, what in the world are you doing? Are you trying to get me killed?" Issei whisper shouted at Drake. The dragon within Issei seemingly ignored Issei in favor of seeing what his eternal rival had to say. "It would appear so. I would like to make sure that my host this time around wins our fight. And I believe that I was the lucky one this time, Drake. I can't wait to rub it into your face about what kind of host I have this time. Until then, see you later, old friend," Albion called out, as everyone were confused by that interaction. Once the conversation between the two dragons were done, Izuku decided then and there that now was the perfect moment to pass out and get some beauty sleep. "I really need that date with Sairaorg," she mumbled to herself. Izuku sat in her classroom as she thought about the fight between Rias and Kokabiel. After the fight with Kokabiel, Izuku had been thinking about her place in Kuoh and felt as though her presence here would cause too much trouble. Not to mention how she had wanted nothing more than to be near Sairaorg, due to how she couldn't stop thinking about him. Her female devil friends had constantly questioned her about her date with Rias' cousin, who Izuku had just found out about later on that week, when she had overheard Izuku talking to Akino about it. Needless to say, Rias was very concerned with how Izuku was getting really close to her cousin and was very protective of his chastity. Izuku had always been very oblivious when it came to the opposite SEC at school. But whenever she was around Sairaorg, he provided her something that most of the other people from her world couldn't. He gave her a good fight when they both met. She still had one for all, at least she thought she did. Not once in the past had she been able to use the power itself. So she just went about her day without the usage of her quirk, although she really wished she could be capable of defending herself. Returning back to the apartment that was given to her after a long day of schooling, she walked through the door, taking off the upper half of her uniform. Glancing down on her body, she would squish her melons as she felt them up a bit. Frowning in complete confusion, she walked over to the bathroom as she checked the size of them. Taking her shirt off for a second, she looked at their size, and they were bigger than they were before she had fought Kokabiel with the rest of Rias' peerage. Is it just me, or is my body completely changing to be more demonic? Is everyone within the supernatural world just very RDC or something? I mean, I've seen some pawn in the past from my mother's room, but I didn't think everyone in the supernatural would be RDC in how they appeared. Izuku muttered as she walked out of the bathroom. As she sat down on her bed without her shirt, she glanced at her rear this time. Pressing a hand to her rear, she couldn't help but let out a sensitive before she shook her head at this. "I really need to figure out how to be a devil. I didn't think this new version of my body would be well sensitive," Izuku mumbled. A magic circle appeared next to her bed as she immediately pulled a shirt over her form. And as she stared at the shirt in question, she couldn't help but wonder who styled her clothing attire, as the shirt she was wearing was literally named a pay power. Shaking her head, she watched as the person who arrived was actually Sirzechs, the man who turned her into a purebred devil, and at the same time saving her life from an early grave. "Good evening, Izuku. I'm glad that I managed to find you first. I've come here to inform you about the summit happening on Parents' Day. Do you mind if I crash here?" Sirzechs questioned. Why? Not that I don't want to or anything," Izuku asked before stammering. "Well, the reason I wanted to stay here was so that I can keep my presence a secret from Rias. She wouldn't ever want me near her home, so I would ask you next." Sirzechs stated. "I don't see why not, but I'd like to have another date with Sairaorg again." He's really nice, Izuku said, looking out the window. Well, I will leave you to your devices. I need to contact the other faction heads. They need to know where to be when we hold our summit. Sirzechs said, leaving in a crimson magic circle. As the day of the summit was coming closer by the day, Izuku had finally managed to get Sairaorg to come to the human world. It was here that she brought the young man on a date in the human world as she showed him everything it had to offer. She took him around the entire town as she showed him every single place they could go to. She brought him to the arcade down the road, to the shopping mall. They didn't get anything, but the thought counted in her eyes. Izuku brought the man over to some fast food restaurants that had allowed them to eat some American foods. And the man was specifically bought with that kind of food, as he had stated multiple times that he loved the American burgers. The two were just enjoying themselves before they were returning to Izuku's apartment. The day having been fun for the both of them, as they were both smiling as they walked back to the young woman's home. Entering through the front door of Izuku's apartment, Sairaorg had decided to take it upon himself to get a feel for the place. It was his first time in someone else's home, and he wanted to make sure he knew enough about the girl he was dating. So as he walked through the apartment, he came across a shelf on a wall. Staring at the multiple books, he couldn't help a chuckle that escaped from his throat as he stared at the multitude of them. Picking one out and beginning to read it, he looked over everything the girl had seemingly written down about the place she had once called home. As he read the first entry, he stared in awe at how much of a strategist Izuku really was, even if she didn't portray herself that way. The multitude of ways to take down these people with quirks were vast and surprising, as though she came up with them herself. He was reading the fifth book that he'd grabbed when Izuku appeared back in the living room and placed herself next to Sairaorg. So what caused you to read those? Izuku asked, blush showing on her cheeks. I just noticed them, and I thought that I'd give them a good read, believing a professional made them. That was until I noticed your little trademark, that you place your name on the back of the book. Sairaorg said, as Izuku's face became an even harder blush. Those were from days that I couldn't become a hero. Izuku said, looking away. Why couldn't you become a hero? You are plenty strong right now. Sairaorg questioned, looking concerned. He'd never seen Izuku become more solemn and meek than when they first met one another. The fact that she had been looking away from him as he read the notebook was probably a red flag for him, should have done it for him. But he needed a little bit more information, so he would ask her what happened to cause her to think she couldn't become a hero. Is there a reason why you say that? Sairaorg asked softly. In the world I come from, people will support your dreams if you have a good quirk. Not just any quirk, though, a powerful quirk that will allow you to become one of the best heroes in the world. Izuku said before pausing. I never really had friends growing up. I was constantly bullied in the world I grew up in. They prioritized might over mind, most of the time, and they thought that if someone quirkless wanted to become a hero, then they should make sure that they could never achieve a dream such as that. Izuku said, looking at the ground with a sigh. You didn't have a superpower in your world, and they just beat you down for having a dream. Sairaorg questioned, slightly angered. Not only that, but they physically and mentally beat me down. Thought that I was believing myself to be better than those who had quirks. I was literally on my way to the UA entrance exams in my world when a villain had stopped my trek there and sent me to this world, although it was in the Underworld when I first arrived. Izuku explained as Sairaorg nodded. Wasn't anyone on your side, at least to support your dreams? Sairaorg questioned, looking curious. Not really. The only one who had supported my dream was after he told me I couldn't become a hero, then said I could as soon as I proved him wrong. It was cathartic in the moment, because he granted me something I could never hope to achieve. Izuku said, staring at her palm. And as the two sat in silence, Sairaorg was about to question what she meant by those last words, when he saw green electricity sparking around her form. It made her hair, her eyes, and most of all her body glow with an eerie teal color. Not to mention her eyes glowed, which made him appreciate their color even more. Could you tell me your name again? He asked in awe. Izuku Midoriya, although in Japan it should really be Midoriya Izuku. The young woman said with a chuckle. You know, the fact that your name means the green hero, it's kind of funny. Sairaorg said with a laugh. Yeah, my mother wanted me to be named Izumi before, but my dad wanted me to have a masculine name. Not that I turned out as a boy that he wanted. Izuku said, looking towards the television. Well, at least someone believed in you. Albeit after you having showed them their choice in not believing in you was wrong. Sairaorg said, smiling at Izuku. Yeah, he was like the father I never had. Izuku stated, looking out the window. Father you never had, your father wasn't around. When you grew up, was he? Sairaorg questioned, as Izuku glanced at him with her eyes. No, he lived in America, just so he could send money over for me and Mom to live in our apartment. I've never really seen him since I was around 3 years old. Izuku said, as she thought about her mentor. My mentor, he was the only male role model in my life. He was the one who inspired me to become a hero for everyone, not just for myself. Izuku said, staring at her hand. I see. How did he become your mentor in the first place? Sairaorg questioned. He saved me at first from a sludge villain. I was being suffocated, and he came out of a sewer grate and defeated the villain with a Texas smash. After that, he signed my notebook since it was one of the highest honors a hero could do to their fans. Izuku said, pulling a burnt notebook from the shelf. Sairaorg looked at the specific notebook, noticing the burn marks on its cover as well as pages. Opening the notebook she'd given him, he read the pages inside before he came across the 2-page spread of the man's name. He stared at the name in awe, before coming to a conclusion of what happened after the signature of the hero. He told you that you couldn't be a hero, didn't he? He asked. Not at first. He said that being a hero is very dangerous work, and that to be a hero is to risk one's life no matter the cost at any time. It wasn't until later that day, after saving the boy who had come to bully me for most of my life, that he changed his words, stating to me that I could become a hero, and that he chose me as his successor. Izuku said, small tears falling from her eyes. He was the very first person who told me that I could become a hero, and he gave me his quirk so that I could become that hero in the first place. Izuku said, rubbing her arm. I can see why he did that, from what I heard in the fight against the fallen cadre. Sairaorg said, as Izuku looked away. Well, now isn't really the time to try and become a hero anymore, isn't it? Izuku asked, as Sairaorg smirked at her. I personally think the Underworld could benefit with someone who is a hero. Someone to stand up for all the discrimination against those who are half BLD devils, servants to their own masters, as well as former servants who'd became masters of their own. They could benefit from someone who could be their hero. Sairaorg said, with a smile. I don't know. I'm not sure if the elders would appreciate a hero for those who weren't part of their race entirely. Izuku said, rubbing her arm. As the two remained in her apartment, they heard a knock on her apartment door. Turning their heads to look at the new arrival, Izuku opened the door to find Sirzechs Lucifer standing at the door with nothing more than a sleeping bag. Sairaorg looked at the scene before himself with some kind of amusement before standing up. I think I should head home now. It was nice having another date with you, Izuku, Sairaorg said before creating a magic circle. It was nice while it lasted, but I think you should head home too. See you on our next date. Izuku asked, curious expression on her face. Exactly, I will set it up in the Underworld next though, Sairaorg said, with a chuckle before disappearing in a purple magic circle. Well, I didn't think that you'd get it on with Bael this soon, Sirzechs said, mirth writ on his face. We didn't do much more than go out on a date, Sirzechs. We just got back when you knocked on the door, Izuku said, looking away from the man with a blush. Well, just know that the summit will be tomorrow. I also thank you for being capable of housing me for this night, Sirzechs said, with a smile as he laid down on the couch. Watching the man lay himself down on her couch, she couldn't help but be reminded about how her father was when she last seen the man. He was incredibly tired and appeared to be wanting nothing more than to get at least some kind of cumbersome sleep. But from how the Devil King had laid himself down on her couch, a small mirage of her father had appeared. As she turned to walk to her bedroom, she sat on her bed as a stray tear fell down the side of her face. Just remembering how her father had been so tired that day, it really caused some very bad memories to come back up about how the man treated both her and her mother. Shaking her head, she laid down on her bed in an attempt to fall asleep and move past her well-past life. Izuku woke up the next day as she remembered about the summit. It was going to be tonight, and she walked out of her bedroom as she prepared breakfast. It wasn't much, just a bowl of cereal as she made enough for Sirzechs as the man was just watching the news. Placing the bowl in front of the Devil King, the man nodded at her as she went back into her bedroom, getting her school clothing on. As she left the apartment, she waved goodbye to Sirzechs as the man waved at her as well. Walking down the street, she paid very much attention to those around her as she walked across the sidewalks. By the time she had arrived at the school gates, she found Rias and the rest of her peerage standing in front of the place. Although there was someone else standing there with them, all which caught her attention. A young man who had short white/silver hair had been leaning against the wall. He wore a black biker jacket as well as biker gloves over his hands. His pants were ripped around the knees, and his shoes were far too expensive for him to be wearing if he wore such delinquent clothing. She glanced over at Rias and Aquino, who were glaring at the man with utter hatred. I'm sorry, but can we please begin our day of school, sir? I would rather not be late on Parents' Day, Izuku asked, as the young man glanced in her direction. I see, my apologies, ma'am. Don't let my appearance bother you. I only came here for the young man named how do we say. I will see some of them later on tonight anyway, the young man said, as Izuku nodded. As the young man walked away, Izuku looked at each of the peerage belonging to Rias. They were staring at her with confusion as well as concern as Izuku didn't even regard him as a threat. Did you know who he was? Rias asked, concerned. No, but I would rather not learn that until the summit tonight. And besides, we really need to get on to school. Ground school is about to start, Izuku said as she rushed off to class. Though, the Parents' Day, school day was actually really fun for Izuku. For someone who'd never really had a parent to come to her school, while she was learning, it was actually really nice for her. Looking at her classmates who were partaking in their time, with their parents cheering them on, however, didn't bode well in her mind. Why doesn't everyone appreciate how their parents being here is a good thing? Don't they know that their parents aren't going to be around for their entire lives? Izuku thought to herself. By the time she made it to her pottery class, she was sitting in her seat. She looked at the pot of clay as she thought about what she could create with it. Thinking back to how this world didn't have any kind of superhero merchandise, Izuku decided that if she couldn't get it here, she'd just make it here, as she set to work on the pottery and used a slight bit of magic to make sure that it was polished. She started off with her idol in All Might. The man's features were very distinguishable for her to remember, especially so when she was practically raised on the video she had seen as a child of his first debut in Japan. She immersed herself in her memories, completely forgetting about the lesson she was supposed to be doing. And by the time she had left her thought process, she had stared down at her creation, and it was a perfect replica of the top 10 heroes of her world. All Might stood in his nearly perfect stance, showcasing that he was here. Endeavor stood to the side, giving those around her a side eye that begged them to do a villainous action. Hawks had a laid-back expression on his face as he held 2 clay feathers in each hand as he pointed one outward, whilst the other remained behind him. Best Jeanist was actually someone who was appearing to be more complicated for her to even realize how well done he was made. He was in his most famous stance with a small piece of clay that stretched from his hands between his fingers as they spiraled outwards. Mirko was someone that caused the entire classroom to stare in awe, as she was in a very risk stance as she had her lower body pointed upwards with her rear pointing at the ceiling. Her rabbit ears all the way perked up to hear anyone nearby, whilst her hands laid under her chin with her feet twisted inwards. The rest of the heroes she'd made looked quite intimidating as they stared at the front of the classroom. Not only that, but they were in very recognizable battle stances aside from the one that she spent the most time on, that being All Might. Most of the class had made questions about if she could create more of those heroes she'd made for the rest of them. Izuku just embarrassedly smiled at the all and began to use the clay they gave her to make some more heroes that were on the two of her mind. It allowed her to remember all the chances she had to become a hero in her old world being lost now that she lived here. Unaware of the tears falling from her eyes, she worked HRD on each and every single clay statue as the class continued with their lesson. By the time school was over for the day, Izuku was left with hundreds of heroes on her desk as students left and right paid for her figurines. Unable to say no to the money being handed out to her, she was left with her All Might figurine as she had stated it wasn't for sale. She wanted to keep something of her previous mentor/father figure with her so that she wouldn't feel as though she were alone. Leaving the classroom and walking through the hall, she heard a commotion coming from the gymnasium as she shook her head. Walking over to the old school building where the ORC was located, she soon found Issei and the others standing in front of a door that was marked as dangerous. Watching as they all walked into the room, she didn't hear anything until Rias and the rest of her peerage had left the room with a +1 with them. She followed the group into her club room as she began giving out orders to each and every one of them. It wasn't until Rias left that everyone had even noticed Izuku was standing in the room near the small boy with curiosity in her eyes. The boy in question, being a damper and not liking attention, hid in his little box. Izuku, not being deterred from the boy hiding from her, just plopped herself down in front of the box, staring into the cutout eye holes. And very appealing pinkish-violet eyes had stared in her own emerald teal eyes as the boy just stared into her compassionate expression. "Who are you?" the boy asked with a small screech. "My name is Izuku Midoriya Gremory. Just think of me as Rias' stepsister," Izuku said with a small smile. "And nice to meet you, Izuku-san. But why are you staring at me?" The boy cried out with fear. "I'm just curious. I've never really seen human look like you," Izuku said as she flipped the box over, having the poor boy fall out. "And you cross-dress as though you wish you were a girl. I'm not going to judge you for that," Izuku said with an amused expression on her face. "I dress like this because I like it," the boy said indignantly. "I know that. I overheard Rias earlier," Izuku said, patting the boy's head. The entire room was filled with silence as they watched the two interact with one another. Issei, who was given permission to begin Gasper's training, just allowed it to happen since he didn't know what to do. As they watched Izuku pull the boy into an embrace, they just smiled as the boy was just looking like a fish out of water. Izuku had then began to braid the boy's relatively short hair before dolling him up to appear as though he were a female. "He's not going to beat the allegations this time," Issei chuckled as Kiba spoke up. "What are you talking about? I never knew there were allegations to begin with," Kiba said as Issei laughed hard. A few hard minutes later, Izuku was outside with Issei and the others as Gasper's training began, and they were throwing dodgeballs at the boy. The boy apparently had a sacred gear that could quite literally stop time, and they wanted him to become stronger with his usage of it. Izuku, who was very encouraging to the boy, had been cheering him on as Gasper had somehow become very bonded with her. With her cheering the boy on, he was far more capable of training harder to get things right the first time around. Although when he began to cry about failing, Izuku was right there to console him for his failure and get him to try again with renewed strength. It was kind of funny. She was treating Gasper as though he were a mere toddler when he really was around the age of 16. It also caused something inside Izuku's mind to click at something maternal. Some kind of thought that she'd never even thought of before having children in the future. When thinking about it with Sairaorg, her face became a blushing mess before shaking her head at that notion. There was no way Sairaorg would even jump the gun at giving her a child, not when they weren't even married. Also, why was she even thinking about kids right now? She was literally 16 years old, and she still had multiple years to go before she even thought she wanted children. Shaking her head again at that thought, she went back to cheering Gasper on as the boy did his very best in order to make her proud. It was as though they were having a mentor/student relationship building between the two, as Issei was the secondary mentor. They were approached by Azazel of the Gregory, but the man had only stuck around for a few minutes before heading away. Izuku, however, had just stared at the man as he disappeared into the darkness of the nearby forest heading towards the old school building. She focused her attention back on the training in front of her as she told Issei that they should give Gasper a break. That would turn out to be a great idea as the boy had fallen to the ground exhausted. For the remainder of the evening, they all were waiting for the summit to begin as Izuku walked up to the room where the three factions would be in waiting. Izuku sat down in the extra seat by Sirzechs and Sairaorg's seats. Izuku had learned about Sona's older sister earlier on in the day before the summit. As she waited for the faction heads to arrive, she sat at the table thinking about her relationship with Sairaorg. Could she really move on to the next part of their relationship without causing him to run away? No, there was no way he would want that. He was obviously not lusting after a body, that was for sure. And as she finished that thought, Sirzechs and Sairaorg had appeared in the room next to her seat. "Good evening, Midoriya-san," Sairaorg said happily. "Good evening, Sairaorg-san," Izuku replied with a nervous expression. "Gosh, what is taking those other meatheads so long to come here? I have a movie to set up back in the Underworld, and I want to get this all set up as fast as possible so I can complete that," Sairaorg said, pouting. "I am sure that the meeting will go as planned," Sirzechs said, as everyone else soon arrived. First was Azazel with his +1, being the white/silver-haired young man that she'd seen earlier that day. Izuku gave the young man a nod, who just looked at her in question before nodding in her direction as well. Clearly, he didn't know about her existence. Even though he stopped by earlier in the day, did he not know she was a supernatural creature as well? Not too long after Azazel was Michael, and the man's appearance was really that of an angel as he appeared in the room with nothing more than a blinding light. Azazel cracked a joke about the angel being last in the meeting, when they were the ones who were all about being on time. But with those inquiries out of the way, the meeting had been underway. Sirzechs and the other leaders of the summit talked about things that were basically dodging around the one thing they all had on mind. That was until Azazel came out with it and spoke what they were truly wishing to talk about. "So, are we done beating around the bush with these talks? Because I'd really like to get right into the peace agreement between our races," Azazel said with a serious expression. "Are you not aware that it was someone from the Gregory that had attacked areas that were in Heaven's territory and entered Devil territory?" Sirzechs questioned. "I wasn't aware of what Kokabiel's plans were. All I know was that he was planning something big, but not Great War kind of big," Azazel said, waving their concerns away. "So what does this say about the red and white dragon emperors?" Michael asked, looking at Issei and the white/silver-haired young man. "As long as I'm capable of fighting strong opponents, then I'm fine with peace," the white/silver-haired young man replied with a shrug. "I'd much rather get on with my life and manage to live my life in peace. I really hate conflict between other races and the devils," Issei said, looking at each of the faction heads. "Then I see no more time to wait than now to set this all up," Sirzechs said, pulling out a piece of paper and signing it. "This paper is a peace treaty between all three of our factions. Each of us will get a copy of it to hold within our respective faction territories and allows us equal rights on what we give to the other," Sirzechs stated seriously. As this was happening, Izuku felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand up on end. Looking around the room in clear confusion, her movement was caught by the white/silver-haired young man. But he just glanced outside the window with nothing more than a small smirk on his face, as the entire room and world around them suddenly became a dull color. Due to Izuku sitting next to Sairaorg and Sirzechs, their aura protected her from being frozen in time itself. And as she stared at those who were stuck in time, her confusion became even worse as she began to question what was even happening. Sirzechs, what is going on? And why is some of the people in this room frozen?" Izuku asked, waving a hand in front of a few people who weren't powerful enough to power through the attack. "This is an attack on the three factions itself. But I never thought that they'd attack a peace talks between all three factions itself," Azazel quipped as he stood up and looked outside the window. Looking outside, everyone noticed how hundreds of magic circles began to appear in the sky as magicians were coming out of them. That was until the building's ceiling and roof was blown up, that was blocked by all three faction heads blocking the attack with a powerful barrier. And a tan-colored woman floated down in front of them all as she stared at Sirzechs and Sairaorg in question. "It appears that we're late to the party. Can we please stop this peace treaty from being signed?" The woman questioned with a cruel smirk. "Kateria Leviathan, one of the previous Satans that were exiled from the Underworld. It appears as though you've come back," Sirzechs said, with a very serious expression on his face. Sirzechs Lucifer, it appears as though you are doing your job, but not to its fullest extent. Kateria said, with a mock attitude. I'm sorry, but what is even happening? Izuku asked, completely bewildered and confused. So you brought a human into this Sirzechs. I never took you to be one who would reveal the supernatural like this. Kateria said, with a mock laugh. Oh no, that is what you should recall as my daughter. I should have you know, Kateria, she is nearly as strong as I was back in the Devil Civil War alone. Sirzechs evenly spoke out. Is that so? Then you wouldn't mind me attempting to usurp her from your lineage. Kateria questioned with a mirth in her eyes. Do you think you can beat her, Izuku? Sirzechs questioned. What are her powers? Izuku asked, entering a combat mentality. She has control over water and ice, although ice is a very small amount. Sairaorg informed as Izuku nodded. If her control is only that of water and a small bit of ice, then I should have no problem with fighting her. Izuku said, as she floated in the air. So you can use magic. I never took Sirzechs for one to have enough time to teach. Kateria mocked. Oh, don't worry. He wasn't the one to teach me everything I know about the power of destruction. Izuku retorted as she let her aura flow out from her body. Then please, show me everything you learned from your mentor. Kateria called out, creating a water serpent. You'll want to create a small area barrier so I can fight her. It will get messy. Izuku said, as Azazel snapped his fingers. Around the two, a massive 300-meter dome covered them both as it spanned out for miles around the two. Izuku smirked at her opponent as Kateria glared at Izuku with a cruel smile on her own face. Play the host here. Tell me, has a devil such as yourself ever experienced fear? Izuku asked with a smile, before she began to let her aura blast outward. Her aura, which was that of a teal-green and a crimson-red color, had blasted outwards, knocking Kateria back. Her sea serpent had been reduced to nothing more than ash as the woman growled at Izuku for destroying her magic spell. Once Izuku finally let her aura die down a bit, she placed a small amount of the aura around her body to form a small kind of shield. Once that was completed, she then formed a gigantic ball of pod and let it increase in size until it was the size of a small moon. The ball of power then was separated into millions of little balls of destruction, causing Kateria's expression of smug indifference to change and morph into fear. Izuku's expression of pure seriousness hadn't changed at all as a small smirk came onto her own face. Then, as though they were attaching themselves to her fingers, Izuku then called a few of them to her hand. They glowed ominously around her hands as they blasted out in wide arcs covering the 300-meter area. Kateria had blasted herself around the barrier in an attempt to dodge the incoming attack, as she deflected each and every blast that came her way as best she could. But one managed to slam into the lower part of her back, slamming her down to the ground. As though that was what Izuku was waiting for, she used her hands and pulled them down with her eyes glowing a crimson-red color. Devastator Ray. Izuku called out. Sea Serpent. Kateria called out from her spot on the ground. The sea serpent had flown towards the multitude of pods flying towards Kateria as they collided in the sky. Large explosions of power began to ripple through the barrier as Azazel from the sidelines had begun to make a comment. You sure that she is your daughter, Sirzechs? I'm sure that you never had birthed a child before Milika is this powerful. Azazel said with a low whistle. Grafia trained her to become as strong as I was during the Devil Civil War, only to make sure that she could be far more capable of standing alone in a fight. If I were to make sure that she was powerful, she'd be the fourth super devil in existence. Sirzechs stated as they all watched the fight. The Devastator Ray pierced through the sea serpent and blasted towards Kateria, who stared on in horror. Explosions blasted around the area, as Kateria was thrown over to Izuku as she merely walked over. Kateria's body was singed and very burnt by the end of it. Izuku wasn't even trying very hard to kill the woman. But when Izuku stood over Kateria, the tan-skinned woman glared up at Izuku as the young green and crimson-haired girl stared down at her. Her face was set up in a very sadistic smile on her face as her eyes glowed crimson. Her hair flowed around behind her as Kateria had noticed something odd about her expression. Whilst her eyes portrayed guilt, her facial features showed that she enjoyed giving pain to her through the sadistic smile. But what really set her fear to come in slowly bit by bit was how the girl's previous emerald teal eyes were nothing more than crimson-colored now. I overheard Sirzechs state that had he been the one to train me, that I'd be the fourth super devil in existence since the Great War. And he wasn't wrong. What he didn't know, however, was that I had already reached that through Graphia's training long ago. Izuku said, as the aura had left her form looking sharper than it did when she powered up. In no way. There's no way you are a super devil. Kateria called out from the ground as a palm placed itself on her face. Hush. You should have already known this when you came here. But there was no coming back for you. Sirzechs and the other faction heads here are far more powerful than you could ever be. Izuku spoke before glancing between the woman's melons. What's this? She asked, pulling the vial out. It held a small black snake inside, as Kateria tried to yank the item from Izuku's hand. But before the woman could even do that, Izuku stomped her foot on the woman's face as Izuku let out a small chuckle. You had a backup plan for if your power alone wasn't strong enough to defeat Sirzechs or Sairaorg. You would take a hand-me-down from a superior being in order to kill them. Sorry to say this, but if you had used this against Azazel, you might have been able to take an arm, but nothing more than that. Izuku said, with a chuckle before crushing the vial and snake. You dare Bismarck Ophis name. She growled. Ophis. I don't know who that is, but if you are asking, a being such as them for assistance in your fight, then you are no devil, as you will be fighting with your own battle power. Izuku said, kicking Kateria into the air. Kateria had glared down at Izuku, her body beaten and burned within a matter of a few minutes at best. But it brought enough time for Izuku to allow the woman to get to her full power and throw a magical attack as hard as she could at Izuku's position on the ground. Take all my power. Serpent's revenge. Kateria screamed as her eyes became bloodshot. The sea serpent had flowed through the air as it fell towards Izuku. The young woman had looked at it with a bored expression as it slammed into her form with a direct hit. Sirzechs and the others were looking quite pensive as they stared in awe of the fight that had only started about 2 minutes before. The smoke took a while to clear as Kateria had begun to laugh about her win, showing that she really didn't think that Izuku's claim to being a super devil was true. But by the time the smoke cleared, Izuku was shown with nothing more than scratched clothing as she wiped some dust from her left shoulder. You really call that an attack? Geez, even All Might could have done more damage than you. Izuku called out. You dare mock my power. I am of a Satan-class being. Kateria called out, flying down towards Izuku with a water spear. Ooh, a new kind of magical attack. Too bad it's too weak. Izuku said, whilst catching the weapon with nary 2 fingers. I will show you a real attack, but spoilers, you won't survive it. Izuku spoke as she pulled Kateria in for a full Nelson. Izuku's face became a very red color as her body glowed an ominous crimson glow. Kateria noticed the weird coloring and didn't like it as she struggled to escape from the hold. That was before words were uttered into her ear that gave her pause. All Might's demise. Izuku mumbled as the surrounding area was engulfed in a pod-powered explosion. Thank you for joining us on this journey through what if female Deku was in Highschool DXD. We hope you found it as captivating as we did. A big thank you to Anthony Tyler 9 for creating such an engaging story. Don't forget to visit their profile on Wattpad for more fantastic works. The link is in the description below. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and subscribe to Zenin Fanfics for more intriguing explorations into fanfiction and fantasy. Your support helps us create more content like this, and we love hearing your thoughts and suggestions in the comment section. See you soon in the next video.